Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Naruto had enough of Sakura. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. Naruto awoke to sound of singing birds. He dragged himself out of bed and pulled off his nightcap. The bathroom called him, and he went to relieve himself. He was ponderously slow in the mornings, after waking at all really, so it was no surprise when he spilt a good bit of milk on the table before realizing he was missing his cereal. Filling up his bowl, he went and got paper towels from over the sink and cleaned up the milky mess. I hate soggy cereal. Naruto ate the rest of his breakfast and then moved to get dressed and head out the door. The morning walk to the bridge he, Sakura, and Kakashi still met at each day woke him up from his morning drowsiness. He sat down on T bridge and began to wait. Sakura would appear sometime around 9 o'clock, and Kakashi would follow up somewhere around 11 o'clock or noon. This gave Naruto plenty of time to think. What did Sakura think of him, after not being able to bring Sasuke back? What did anyone who mattered think? After this thought hit him, he went into himself to steel up his nerves to ask Sakura that question when she got there. When Sakura did show up, it was not as her normally happy and bubbly self. She had seemingly gotten little to no sleep last night, and her eyes were red. Naruto could barely keep his eyes on her for the sorrow he felt wash over. Sakura sat down on the only bench that was there, but as far away from Naruto as she could possibly manage it. She almost seemed afraid of him. "Sakura?" Naruto asked, testing the water. Sakura looked at him and nodded, as if she didn't trust her own voice right now. "What do?" Naruto took a deep breath to steady himself. Why was this so hard to ask? "What do you think of me? For not bringing him back?" Sakura made a choking noise and looked away from him. Naruto moved to comfort her, but she held up a hand and stopped him in his tracks. "I have no need for liars." She managed to get out, rather quickly. Naruto nearly fell over. "I can't stand it. He isn't here, where I need him, and where Konoha needs him. You failed, you broke your Nendo, and nothing you can say will make it better." Sakura spat, seeming to have shifted from terrified to offended. Naruto bristled just a bit at her words. "I tried everything I could think of. He's too far gone for me to get to. What else can you expect of me?" Naruto stared her down, expecting a prompt answer. He got one. "If you had tried everything, he'd be here. If you'd let someone else do it, he'd be here. But you lied to me, and I." She paused for a moment, as though she were about to do something she might regret. "I hate you for it." Naruto was shocked for only a moment. He knew that this day might come, the one where he heard the words he thought might break him. However, broken wasn't what he felt at all. All he felt was angry. "I do everything I possibly think of, short of bringing a corpse back to Konoha, and you hate me for that? Would you rather have a skull to profess your love to? Your love, until now, was something that I wanted so badly. I made that promise just to see you happy." He turned on his heel and began walking away. "Now, I just hope you wither and die, Sakura. You won't be getting my help to get your precious little traitor back." "Don't you call Sasuke that. He isn't a traitor," Sakura piped up, finally having found her voice. Naruto's aura flared up. "I'll call him what he is. He was someone who didn't deserve you, I thought. I'll impress her, and save her some pain. But now, I see something much more clearly. Naruto was a pawn in such a short amount of time that he may have well teleported. It was you who didn't deserve him, just like he always told you." Naruto then removed her from his personal space and walked away. He threw one last comment over his shoulder. His aura, backing up, made it seem to be the final thing he'd ever say to her. "Goodbye, Sakura. Even though I don't care, and you don't care, goodbye and good riddance." There is a small problem with having an argument like this in a village full of people who are trained to be assassins and spies. There are too many flies on the wall for this kind of argument to not spread so rapidly as to not come back and bite the arguers in the bottom. The two flies on the wall this time were Hitaki Kakashi and Yamanaka Ino. Ino was about to leave to go gossiping, but stopped when she saw Kakashi walked into the clearing and none too carefully put Sakura on a bench. Kakashi sighed. "I'm fairly sure you know that you brought that down on yourself, right?" Sakura didn't look at him. He made her look directly into his visible eye. "Right?" Sakura shook her head quickly and Kakashi put back down on the bench. Composing himself, he continued. "He couldn't stand up to the constant rejection forever, Sakura. He truly and honestly was attracted to you right until a few minutes ago. He wasn't proud of his feelings and severed them like a mangled limb. I'm not too proud of you as my student to have you treat one of your own teammates like that. Sakura shook at each point Kakashi made and each truth he revealed. She spoke when he paused. But he broke his promise to me and Kakashi cut her off before she got any further with that line of thought. He didn't break that promise. It was a stupid promise to make, like he said. Sasuke is still out there, waiting to be rescued. Waiting to be found. Maybe not in his head, but he can still be recovered. The promise is only unfulfilled. But you've just lost your biggest helping hand. I certainly wouldn't follow you into Sound Country to help you get him back. So now, you've got only yourself to get him back. Kakashi stood from his leaning posture. I'm taking you back to my place to clean you up, and then both of us are going to apologize to him. You for saying what you did and me for letting it go on for as long as it did. The girl stood and fell in line behind her teacher. Ino bounded away to spread gossip. After all, what else does the root of the grapevine do? Naruto was packing everything essential in his apartment. Clothes, kunai and shuriken, the few jutsu scrolls he had that he was trying to master. He packed the stealth, camouflage, and winter clothes that he had near the top if he needed them. Yes, he does so own stealthy clothing. They're just not as comfy. When everything he valued was packed up, he was confronted with the only picture he'd ever been given. It had some sentimental value sometime in the past, but not as it was now. He pulled the picture of Team 7 out of its frame and tore off the pictures of Sakura and Sasuke, put the picture back in the frame, and then put the picture and his wallet in the backpack. When he picked up the backpack, it felt somewhat lighter than it should have. He shrugged it off, attributing to his recent height gain. His old orange suit barely fit him anymore, and it was about high time he got a new one. All three of his 4 suits had been birthday presents from Sarutobi or Iruka. The orange suit he'd simply found laying around, and nobody claimed it after a week but him. So that's how he'd gotten every stitch of clothing he owned. Most of the stuff in his backpack was food or weapons. He decided then and there that he would fill up his backpack so he'd have everything he'd need to survive. Some survival gear, more jutsu scrolls, more weapons, whatever he could scavenge or steal. The only people he had qualms taking from in the village were Iruka and the Ichiraku family, as well as most of the rookies. So, he'd just simply avoid taking things from them and then be on his way. Ino had just finished gathering up Tenten, Temari and Hinata to have a gab session. She was going to talk about what she had seen between Naruto Sakura. I heard that the Hokage is sleeping with Shizune and… No way, she doing with Jiraiya. That's impossible, she'd pound him into the ground before he got a grope. It's got to be Shizune. If she could ever stop the deluge of comments about the life of the Hokage. She sighed. While it was a nice topic, Temari and Tenten seemed to try to dominate the conversations that they had during their GAB fests with it. She was honestly getting tired of hearing the preferences and who's doing who and when and where best to watch from of everyone in the whole damn village. Tenten. Temari. Enough. She hoped that that was enough to get their attention. It was. They looked momentarily sheepish, but knew that when Ino did that, she had something to say, and it was usually a really juicy secret. Hinata started to pay rapt attention too. Thank you for taking a break from your absent lives. I'm sure we needed to hear about them, again. Tenten and Temari had the decency to look abashed. Ino continued completely out of her previous character. Alright, so, while I was walking home from the marketplace, I overheard something you won't believe. Ino squealed excitedly. Temari and Tenten leaned forward to give their opinions on what is going on. Ayame is running off to become a pop star? Choji stayed then? Maybe Jiraiya's got a new book out? Neji and Lee sleeping together. No, Lee and Guy. Ino quickly slapped them upside the head to get their minds back on track. No, I heard Naruto and Sakura arguing. The girls sat back with a mixture of disbelief at this being important and relief, on their parts, that Tenten and Temari wouldn't get to eat this new rumor alive just yet. How's this news? Temari deadpanned. Naruto wins. Ino deadpanned back. The other girl's eyes went wide. Naruto won? As in he actually argued? Tenten asked. Ino nodded and went in for the kill. Kakashi even backed him up afterwards. Naruto poked about that subject, and Sakura went all weepy bitchy on him. Said some things I couldn't quite hear, but whatever it was, it gave Naruto enough spine to stand up to her and tell her off. Ino finished with a flourish. The girls all leaned in, including Hinata, and in excited voices said, "Really?" Ino's sweat dropped, and leaned back. Yeah, really," Ino said. Temari pulled out her smirk and looked right at Hinata. "That's great. Now, if only, he would notice someone else." Hinata saw who she was staring at and turned the color of blueberry tomato juice. "That doesn't sound too appetizing, thinking about it." "Yeah well, that isn't too likely right now." The way he stomped off made it look like he was going to. Ino's eyes widened in realization. "What, Ino? Where was Naruto going?" 10-10 prodded. Ino responded promptly. "To his apartment." The same realization hit the other girls. Surprisingly, it was Hinata who was first to speak. He couldn't, could he? Hinata was near the point of hysterics. Ino threw her a concerned look. "I don't know Hinata. I don't think he wants to stay, from the last look on his face. But I hope we're wrong. I hope he's just going to blow it off like he normally does." Hinata paid no heed to Ino's words. She jumped up and sped off towards Naruto's apartment at top speed, the other girls in pursuit. Naruto, open up." Hinata sounded like he might die if he didn't open up. Using her Byakugan, even though it was blurred with tears, she could see no one in the flat. She collapsed, sobbing. The other girls lifted her up and helped the girl walk to her home. "Goodbye, you stupid little shitty ingrates. I don't care anymore. You guys never liked me, and I've had enough of your shit. If anyone wants to find me, come looking. I'll be waiting to see if I'm wrong." And with his final words spoken, Naruto left a few dozen stunned Anbu guards looking at him like he had grown several large orifices, all of which were emitting bright and colorful birds. Hiashi was puzzled. He couldn't figure out for the life of him why his eldest daughter was weeping so ferociously. She only did this when someone in the family close to her died, or if he'd given her a severe verbal lashing. But neither had happened today. She wouldn't open her door and had apparently used one of her mother's sealing wards to keep him, probably simply anyone, out of her room. So he went to the most informed person in the village to find out what in blazes was going on. As he left, he was so absorbed in his own thoughts that he didn't see the shadowy form leaving Hinata's room, bounding off to where a certain silver-haired Junin lived. Hiashi arrived at the Hokage's tower in record time, for not running, and simply went in to see the Hokage. "I see that you're being your normal pompous self. What can I answer?" Tsunade asked with a bit of bite in her voice. "I was wondering if you knew anything that would depress my eldest daughter." Hiashi spoke in a voice that was almost sincere. "Why do you care? Her tears, if discovered, would embarrass the Hyuga clan. I must know so I can at least create a cover story." When Hiashi had finished, Tsunade blinked at him. Maybe he'd disappear if she stared long and hard enough. "Hokage-sama? Apparently not. I assume you know that Naruto has left the village." Hiashi nodded his head to the Hokage's words. "Good riddance to the boy. What has that got to with—" Tsunade cut him off. "Hinata? You, along with Naruto himself, were possibly the only people I know who didn't know that Hinata was attracted to Naruto." "Answer your question?" Tsunade said, desperately wanting a stiff drink to make this headache go away. "Attracted? In what sense?" Hiashi didn't like where this was going. "Hinata loves Naruto. Simple enough for you? Nonsense. Why would she try to mar her family's name like that?" As soon as the words had left his mouth, Tsunade grabbed him by the shirt collar and lifted the man over her head, nearly pinning him to the ceiling. "If this is some shit about the ways of old, again, interfering in a society when those ways no longer function, I simply say this to you." Tsunade drew in a large breath and continued. "The ways of old are dead. And the dead are not to be disturbed." Hiashi was so stunned at the Hokage's outburst that he left without another word to her. He had his answer. Shizune walked in holding a bottle. "I guess you'll be wanting this now. It's a few decades old scotch." Tsunade was immediately upon her ward. "Give that here, now," she said. Shizune relinquished her hold on the bottle, and watched as Tsunade got sloshed really, really fast. As Shizune left the office, she muttered to herself, "Run, Naruto. Run far, run fast, and don't look back." Hinata knocked demurely on Kakashi's door. It was swiftly opened, and Kakashi seemed slightly surprised to see her. "Hinata, what can I do for you?" he said with a happiness so fake. "Let's not make that analogy." "Can you tell me where Naruto would go?" she said, and Kakashi relinquished his smile. He said if anyone cared to come find him. So that means he's going somewhere he'd feel welcome. He wouldn't go to sand, because the only people who, he was interrupted by a voice from behind him. He'd go to wave. Sakura, are you sure? Kakashi said, a dangerous edge on his voice. I regret what I did. As for your question, need I say more than, the great Naruto bridge? Sakura said, almost devoid of emotion. Kakashi nodded. He turned back to relay this to Hinata, but she'd heard what Sakura had said and left. Be safe, Hinata. Godspeed. Naruto had traveled fast, alone and not stopping that night. He felt tired, but there was something he had to do before he fell asleep. He had to visit Haku and Zabuza's graves. Only there was something wrong. The sword he had left in the ground as Zabuza's headstone had been spray-painted and defiled in other ways not appropriate to describe in a T-rated fanfiction. Naruto's fist shook in anger. How dare someone, anyone, do that to Zabuza? Naruto quickly made a Rasengan. There was no way he was strong enough to get it out of the ground in one piece, but he could probably carry the 2 pieces, or made 3 if he had to. He cleanly cut off the part with the handle, finding it lighter than he remembered, even helping. Something strange was going on with his body, but he pushed it aside. He had work to do. He pulled out the part of the sword that was in the ground. He then set himself to the task of grinding off all the spray paint on the sword in front of him. He fell asleep buffing the sword. Hinata had made camp about halfway between Wave and Leaf, and went to sleep herself. She was so exhausted from the previous day's events that she couldn't even hold up her head to watch the embers die out. She didn't hear the wind pass through the trees, on its way to Wave Country. Naruto awoke with a start. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary, but just in case, he slung his pack over his shoulder and picked up the 2, now clean, pieces of Zabuza's sword. He'd earned a whole lot of money from doing all those boring D-rank missions, and Wave had even managed to scrounge enough up money to actually pay him for the A-rank mission he'd been sent on. He might just have enough to get the sword fixed. That bad feeling intensified until it culminated in a shuriken embedding itself in the ground in front of him. A very large, very familiar shuriken-shaped chakram. So they sent you, did they? Naruto turned and asked the masked figure in the tree. Mizuki, he said, the Kyuubi forcing itself into his voice. The masked figure sagged, but only as if it were disappointed at Naruto's observation. Well, I guess I don't have to wear this stupid Anbu mask anymore, do I? Mizuki said, revealing his face. You were in jail. Who let you out? The council let me out as soon as you left. You're now a B-rank missing nin by their declaration. Naruto only felt a small tinge of regret. The last tie to Konoha he had just been severed. So be it. I do suppose you're here to kill or incapacitate me? Naruto asked quietly. Yep, except for that whole incapacitate part. The council wants the Kyuubi dead. Mizuki grinned at his instructions. Oh, vengeance would be so sweet. Especially now that he didn't have to worry about harming the scroll the kid wasn't carrying. Naruto just glared at him. Kit, what, Fox? Naruto had had sparse, but regular conversation with the Kyuubi ever since he'd taken that form to beat Gaara. It was usually trying to tempt him to let him out. Let me kill him. Let me kill the little ingrate who thinks he can kill me. And for once, Naruto didn't disagree in the least. Naruto just simply let go the barrier in his mind, and everything went blank. Kyuubi drew the sword from the pack and threw the rest of the bag down. You just chose the wrong demon lord to insult. You won't be there to grin much longer, Mizuki. Kyuubi's killer intent was dampened coming from an 14-year-old child. Just a little. Mizuki jumped down and drew a second chakram off his back. Demon lord? Huh, you're just some stupid kid they put him in. And I'm going to kill you both. Mizuki smiled, having regained his confidence. He advanced towards the stationary boy. Kyuubi just glared at him. Consciously, you may be right. He isn't supremely intelligent. Kyuubi raised the sword, and in one lightning-swift action, moved to Mizuki, swung, took off his arm, and moved past him. But the Yondaime Hokage wasn't going to put him in a child I would easily be able to trick or bribe. Subconsciously, he is capable of instantly telling lie from truth, fact from fiction. There is something different about this boy. Something you'll never get to know. The killer intent now rolled off of Kyuubi in waves that held the bleeding Mizuki stationary. You can't, please, no? Kyuubi turned on the now hysterical man, and grinned. Don't take on a mission you can't complete. And with that, Kyuubi dove in once again, and in a single motion, lopped off Mizuki's head. The demon lord made a few hand seals and then said, Kaden. Pyre flames. Instantly, Mizuki's body and head were alight. In a few scant seconds, they had been reduced into nothing more than ashes, all of which would be able to tell no one anything. Kyuubi relinquished his hold on Naruto with these final words. One day, we will be one. I cannot escape you, but I can change you. I all need is a direction to change to. And the wind is being so friendly today. Kyuubi took a deep breath, and Naruto's eyes turned from red to their normal blue. Naruto looked about. No Miyaki. That's good. No remains even. That's better. I can claim he's just simply not found me yet if anyone else comes along. Naruto then looked down at his jacket and pants. They were covered in splatter marks of blood and bits of now rotting flesh. Kyuubi. Naruto could feel the demon fox flatten its ears on its head. What, Kit? Kyuubi responded, not liking where this was heading. Next time I let you out, watch where the splatter goes. I don't want to have to buy new clothes each time I let you do that. Naruto could feel the Kyuubi smirk at him. Then just go natural. Naruto mentally glared at Kyuubi, both of them knowing that that was not a possibility. But Kyuubi would tease him about it for a few moments, and Naruto would either laugh along or feel indignant. Naruto thought to himself, away off from where Kyuubi could hear. Maybe I brought the one person who can understand with me. Hinata woke up, and worked the kinks out of her back by doing her morning stretches. She quickly packed up the little she brought with her, and moved out to find her quarry. She ran for most of the morning uneventfully until she came across something lying on the ground, slightly wrinkled from the morning dew. She picked up the scroll, and saw that it was an advanced seal-less skill scroll. They were all traditional Konoha skills, like group replacement and group leaf teleport, but there were a few that she'd never even seen before. Ground surfing? Light? And what is this one? Tree imitation. Hinata looked at these techniques very puzzled. Then she realized what she was looking at, and smiled broadly. I found him. I'm Naruto's trail. With a renewed vigor, she took off to find the boy of her dreams. Tsunade was pissed. Earlier in the morning, she'd moved beyond pissed right now, and had killer intent radiating off of her like light from a bonfire. Which one of you utterly moronic fools ordered Naruto a B-rank missing nin? And without my signature? We all agreed that it was the best action the village could take. Naruto was a danger on the inside of this village, and who knows what retribution he may try and take for being stuck in that form for so long. And as for doing it without you, you were passed out drunk, something the Hokage should never be. He smirked at her, and she glared back. She oh so slowly walked over to his desk, and slammed her fist down on it, smashing the wood and metal contraption clean in half. Naruto is not the Kyuubi, merely his container, and a damn good one at that. And Shizune is well capable of making decisions I'll agree with if I'm drunk, asleep, injured, or in any other way. She stared right into this elder's eyes and made him understand the meaning behind her next word. Incapacitated. Now, I'm going to go gather a team of people that I'm going to personally lead to retrieve Naruto. Shizune will be acting as Hokage in my absence. Another elder, this time a woman, spoke up. You will most likely fail. Your emotions are getting in the way of your judgment. Tsunade didn't let her finish. Emotion was what saved your asses during the Sand Sound War. Regardless of that, the woman said with obvious disdain, we have already dispatched Mizuki at 7:30 to exterminate the vermin. Tsunade threw her a cold look which made even the old wench shiver. He is not vermin, nor was he out to kill you until, Tsunade tried to start, but failed, as it was Hiashi, of all people, who interrupted her. Tsunade, you are a Sannin. You could kill us all if you wanted to. We saw that power, and wanted you as Hokage, because you were strong and learned. But if you cannot see evil where it lies, we have no choice but to. Shikifujin sealed away all the evil you are fearing into Naruto's navel. Unless you push Naruto to the breaking edge and make him want to release the demon, there is no more chance of that happening than you spontaneously turning into a young, pretty, demure woman Hiashi. And I do see evil. Just not in Naruto. I don't see it here either. What I see here is corruption and arrogance, the likes of which I've never seen in all my travels. I have the rest of Konoha backing me up, regardless of what you say, want, or even do. Konoha has me to moderate your actions. Coming to you for unbiased information was obviously a mistake. There is no way you could prove he is even a D-rank missing nin to me, or anyone else who would truly listen to the facts. Most are simply happy to not have him around anymore. Tsunade turned on her heel to leave, but stopped at the door. Hiashi, you asked me a question the other day about why your daughter was in such an emotional wreck. I gave you the truthful answer, but you couldn't believe it. Tsunade paused for effect. I wonder where she is now. Tsunade left the council wonder what the hell just happened, and Hiashi with a sinking sense of dread. Naruto had switched out his now gore-spattered tracksuit for his camouflage suit. The stealth suit had turned out to be too small and popped off his body the instant he had it fully zipped up. The winter suit would have been a bad idea for the humid, downright hot climate. In the forest, he was virtually invisible. Here in Wave Country proper, however, he stuck out like a sore thumb. He needed new clothes and fast. But first things first, he had a sword that needed mending. Walking about in the Wave marketplace was much more difficult than it was last time. Only a few people recognized him, which caused minor gumming in the works, but the main problem was that there were a plethora more people here, making walking at any pace very hard. When he finally got to the road that the blacksmith was on, the crowd had thinned out to the point where he could quickly walk over to the shop. He walked into the small enclosed space where they kept things like the safe and finished goods. He stood there for a moment or two, and no one had come in. He then looked at the door he hadn't come in and read the attached sign. Please step through this door. And shout if you need anything. Fixed or made. Naruto stepped through the appointed door, and did what he did best. He shouted, Oi! All the hammering in the smithy area stopped for a brief moment before a short woman glided out of the back of the shop and looked at him. She smiled. I hadn't heard a shout like that in years. What you need? The woman actually had to look up to make eye contact with Naruto, something to which he wasn't accustomed to. He pulled the pieces of Zabuza's head chopping cleaver out of his backpack. The woman's eyes went a little wide with excitement. What did you do to the sword? She asked, marveling at the sheer size of the sword. I had to break it in two to get it out of the ground. It belonged to a man I respect, he said, averting his eyes from the woman. She understood. I see. What you say I fix her up for ye, sonny? She got a name? Naruto paused at that. Head chopping cleaver just didn't sound like a name for the sword anymore. That was a title he felt belonged only to Zabuza. He felt that both he and the sword were getting a second shot at everything, and instantly a name came to mind. Second Dawn, he said, confident he had chosen right. The woman smiled at him. We'll have Second Dawn fixed up by tomorrow afternoon, Mr. Uzumaki. Naruto's eyes boggled. Most other people hadn't called him that when he was recognized, and most people expected to see him in his orange jumpsuit, so they just thought it was a passing similarity. She smiled at his expression. That face just tells me I'm rigged. Naruto stopped looking so surprised. Someone would have eventually recognized him anyways. He nodded, confirming her suspicions. Tsunade sighed. She had only been able to assemble a little less than half of the rookies that were about Naruto's age. Lee and Shikamaru were out on field assignments. Choji was still recuperating from using the 3 pills during their failed Sasuke retrieval. Hinata was missing, and the Sand siblings had run off as soon as they had heard Naruto was missing from the village. That left her with only Ino, Sakura, Tenten, Neji, Shino, and Kiba. She was reconsidering doing this with so few members, but the solution just walked right into her office. Hokage-sama, can you tell me something? Kakashi had no idea what he was getting himself into, asking that question. I can tell you that you are joining me on an A-ranked mission to help retrieve Naruto. She smiled when she saw his face pale. He then firmed his resolve, restored color to his face, and he barked an affirmative. And I just gotten a date with Anko, too. Oh well, such is the life of a ninja. Naruto had returned to his base camp outside of Wave Country. He'd left Gamakichi and Gamatachi to guard his stuff while he was gone. No one had made off with anything, but one crazy person ran off screaming something about alien invaders, or some other nonsense. He dispelled them and gathered his stuff up. He'd sleep near Zabuza's grave that night to protect what remained from any harm, and go to see Tazuna in the morning. He was pitching his tent when he heard something on the wind. Mist, mist, mist. The chant was strange, but audible. Naruto turned to Zabuza, and saw something that bothered him. In taking out the large sword, there was no proper memorial to the swordsman from the mist. He'd have to remedy that on his next trip into Wave. I think I understand you better now, Zabuza. Better than I did back then. I understand that you wanted change in Mist. To what? I don't know, but you were willing to do anything to change Mist. I'd be willing to change Leaf too. He sighed, laughed, and smirked. But what is a country without its people? He sat there in the long silence, wishing in the depths of his hearts that he could talk to the swordsman once more, just to show respects. He heard, after a while, a faint rustling behind him, like someone was walking through the brush to get somewhere. He moved to extinguish the fire to draw less attention to himself when something stumbled into the clearing. A small, puffy thing in a fluffy jacket. Hinata? They sent you this time? Naruto couldn't understand. Mizuki was at least a hardened criminal who could be bribed. What were they trying to pull by sending Hinata? I found you, Naruto-kun. And I won't let you leave me behind again. Hinata then collapsed into a heap. Kyuubi's stamina allowed him to do crazy things, like make a 3-day full tilt journey in one night. But for Hinata to have caught him in 2 days? She must be on the edge of life or something to that effect to do that. What would possess her to chase me down? In such little time, and of her own motive. At least, I think it's her own motive. It is Kit. She's here because she wants to be. Naruto perked an eyebrow, but said nothing. The reassurance of Kyuubi was all he needed for now. He unpacked Hinata's sleeping bag and put the sleeping girl in his tent. He'd be fine sleeping outside. It was Hinata he would worry about for now. His last thought, as sleep claimed him, was, why? Naruto had gotten very little sleep the previous night, but it was enough for him to function the next day. Hinata was bound to wake up any moment now and come crawling out of the tent. She did, and when she crawled out, she eeped, and hurriedly went back in the tent. Is this real? Naruto nearly fell of the log he was sitting on. He recomposed himself and began looking in at Hinata, who shied away from him. I am very real, and I have questions I want answered. Hinata looked at him strangely when he brought the serious face to bear. Hinata came to the edge of the tent. Oh okay. Naruto nodded. Who sent you? Naruto asked, and Hinata turned away. No one. I came by myself. Naruto gently turned her face towards and looked at her eyes. Seeing no falsities, he let her go, and asked the only remaining question now. Why did you follow me? Naruto watched her reaction. She was very quiet for quite a while, and even then, her answer was a whisper. I love you. The sentence was so quiet and so fast, Naruto nearly missed it. But when he had registered this, he was stunned. Hinata loved him? Love? He just assumed she'd been the stammering girl around everyone, not just him. A lot of things about Hinata made a whole lot more sense now. Naruto slouched down, and thought long and hard. I've been such a hypocrite. I was ignoring her just like Sakura ignored me and Sasuke ignored her. I don't want to believe it, but on some level, I guess I'm worse than they were. Get real. You didn't know because Hinata never said anything. They were mean, you were just ignorant. Kyuubi, you have a very strange way of reassuring someone. I'm so stupid, I shouldn't have said that, you'll send me away. Naruto interrupted Hinata's rambling. Hinata. Naruto's shout got the girl's rapt attention. I am not going to say I return your feelings. I've recently been hurt in that regard, so give me some time to get over that. But I will take care of you. That feeling you have for me is something special, and something I want to guard. Naruto moved to embrace the crying girl. Hinata gratefully accepted the hug, and began crying into his shoulder. Smiling. Remind me why we're bringing her along. Ino asked the Hokage as the entire group moved at an even, steady pace towards Wave Country. She just hoped he'd made some sort of base here and was actually here to find. Kakashi answered her question. For redemption. So she can at least offer the apology, regardless of whether he accepts it. Kakashi finished and moved on. Ino nodded. That's a decent reason. I just wish she was more apologetic looking. She's too robotic-like for me to deal with right now. Ino shuddered as she looked into Sakura's empty eyes. She found that there was something wrong, like she'd broken or something. She was too right. Several miles ahead of them were the Sand siblings. Temari leaned over to Kankuro and asked, "Where are we going?" Obviously after Naruto. "I'm not arguing with Gaara," Kankuro said, automatically responding to Temari. She hit him over the head, and re-emphasized her question. "No, dumbass, I mean what country are we going to?" "Hell if I know. I think Gaara is just going on impulse to where he feels Naruto is." Temari nodded at Kankuro's words. Gaara was in no doubt just following the energy left behind by Naruto's inner demon. But why? She knew her brother wasn't liable to simply off her for no reason now, so she took a risk and went to ask him. "Brother, where are we going?" Gaara looked back over his shoulder at his sister. She shivered at his cold stare, which softened on seeing her flinch. He turned his head back to watch where he was going. "We are going towards Wave Country, an ally of Leaf's. Naruto has a few contacts there. We will at the very least tell him of the political movings in Konoha, and try and see what his plans are. We will decide our next actions from his responses." Temari digested this. They would either follow Naruto, go back to Konoha, or return home to Sand where Gaara was in line to become Cage. She hoped, for everyone in Sand, that Gaara decided to go home and fix Sand. They needed it. Naruto had spent a good portion of the morning just simply talking with Hinata, finding out more about this girl who loved him. He liked what he heard and saw of the young woman who wanted to follow him around. When Hinata's stomach rumbled, Naruto smiled. "Let's go into town and get some breakfast," Naruto suggested, and Hinata demurely nodded. "Before we go, could Chiyose no Justu, Toad Twins summon?" Instantly, Gamakichi and Gamatachi appeared before him. "What you need, Aniki?" Naruto smiled at Gamatachi's words. "I need you guys to do guard duty again. But this time, you've got to guard someone else's stuff as well, okay?" The toads nodded and began to march in little circles around the encampment. Naruto grabbed his wallet and motioned for Hinata to move towards the village. She nodded and he watched her go. "She is beautiful, is she not? She would probably like you too. Lay off until she's older, Kyuubi, okay? Especially with the images." Naruto didn't like it when Kyuubi took hold of his imagination and showed him weird images, but there was nothing he could do to stop the demon except to tell him off. "Alright, I have something more important to talk to you about anyways." When Kyuubi said it was important, it was well, important. "What is it?" Naruto asked him. "For some time when you were very young, I plotted and schemed to get free, to destroy you, my container, and finish what I started 14 years ago. However, the more I looked for a way out, the more I saw that I couldn't get out. It frustrated me to no end, and I eventually gave up for the time being. I entertained the idea of maybe corrupting you to the point to where I wouldn't have to escape, but I knew that was destined to fail the moment I said the word, lie. You've got that unique ability to instantly know a lie, you know that?" Naruto shrugged. "Nice flattery. You got a point?" Kyuubi snorted. "Of course I do. When Orochimaru sealed away my power and kept you from it, I got an idea. I can't leave my cage, and I can't control you, but maybe I could change the way you and I interacted. I could warp my cage into something much more suitable for both of our continued survivals. We could partially merge." Kyuubi felt Naruto's utter distaste for the idea right away, so he tacked on. "I said partially for a reason. I would still be me, a voice in your head, and you would still be you, the loudmouth you are. But my power and knowledge would be yours and yours mine. We'd be able to interact and switch places much more swiftly and efficiently." True to demon form, he just had to make it sound like a deal or sale of some sort. Interested? Naruto was truly interested. He'd have more than enough power to protect those close to him, but he felt there was some sort of snag. "What's the catch?" Kyuubi smiled, anticipating this answer. "Physical changes. You'll probably look different, have different skin textures and hair colors, but other than that, you'd still be you. And my power would stop stifling your growth." Naruto got happy at that thought. "How long would it take? I've already got most of the sigils in place, but this wouldn't be something we could do in one shot. It'll probably take about 4 or 5 tries to get this all the way done. I don't really know how your body will react, and I don't want to destroy us in the process." Naruto smirked. He had hoped the silence he'd left Hinata in was companionable. A shadow passed over his face. He'd have to tell her about Kyuubi in order to make sure the change didn't scare her too much. They were at the breakfast place before much longer. It was very different from the more traditional places that were nearby. I called itself a pancake house, and the previous morning, Naruto had gotten himself hooked on the pancake. "I think you'll like the food here, Hinata. It's very sweet, and very different from rice and pickles in the morning." Naruto whispered in her ear, making the girl start and blush that he was whispering in her ear. "I hoped so." Naruto smiled, still as shy as ever. That was probably the only thing he wanted to change about Hinata, her self-confidence. He hoped she'd just grow out of it. "Welcome back. Table for 2, this morning?" The motherly figure at the hostess's counter gave him an insufferable smirk. He put a hand on Hinata's shoulder and smirked back. Of course. Observant, you are. His smirk grew in size to match hers. Right this way, please. The woman led them to a table and seated them. Your waitress will be with you in a few minutes. Here are your menus, please enjoy, she said, wandering back to her post. Naruto smiled. You won't recognize anything on the menu. It's from really far away. A pancake is sort of like a pastry that's flat and round. It's mildly sweet, and goes good with that syrup right there. He pointed to a bottle on the table. You can get all sorts of things on your pancakes, but I'll just let you decide that for yourself. Naruto went back to entertaining himself with asking for carrot pancakes, just to see the look on the waitress's face when said it. He decided that carrots weren't quite far out there enough to be a real shocker. Eggplant was just too weird, and tomato might actually be something they'd entertain. Lettuce, he decided, would be a good choice. He continued to read his menu to see what he was going to actually have. Hinata was insanely happy. She was eating a meal with Naruto. She could hardly believe her good luck. She looked at the menu and felt a bit of a chocolate attack. She'd have one chocolate chip pancake, just to test the waters. The waitress arrived, a little shaken looking, but otherwise fine. Hi, I'm Kaori. I'll be your waitress this morning. What'll it be? She stood poised for a moment, before adding. You two look really cute, by the way. Hinata felt her ears burn. Naruto was at a loss for words for a moment, then recovered. I think I'd like lettuce pancakes this morning, he said with a face that was so serious, you could probably be able to crack an egg on it. Hinata and Kaori both balked at the idea. Naruto allowed himself a small laugh. Kaori recovered, and saw his laugh. She smiled. You're funny, you know that? She spoke with a knowing tone, and Naruto nodded. I'll really have cherry pancakes, 4 of them. And a big glass of milk. Kaori smiled at his real order, and jotted it down. She turned to Hinata, and smiled at the shy girl. I'll have 1 chocolate chip pancake. And some chocolate milk. Kaori perked an eyebrow. You sure that's gonna be enough breakfast for you? Pancakes are only about this big. Kaori made a size reference to something like a track discus. Hinata nodded, and then thought about it. Some bacon would be nice, she added quietly. Kaori smiled. Alright, bacon, too. Kaori walked past Hinata, before pausing to whisper in her ear. Surprise him. You need to be bold. Just go kiss the sucker, already. Hinata turned the color of a beet, and Kaori laughed lightly. Naruto wondered what the heck was going on. Kiba, Shino, Neji. Please don't try to kill each other now. It's a simple 3-day walk. How can this be so difficult? Tsunade still didn't understand how Shino and Kiba had gotten so bruised during a training practice. Don't worry about it, Hokage-sama. Neji's usually this rough. Lee and I are about the only ones who are used to it. Ten came to the rescue. The Hokage nodded at the explanation, but still looked miffed. Kakashi sighed, and said Shino and Kiba to go fishing. Akamaru trotted behind, limping, but still happy as a puppy. They'll bring back dinner enough for all of us, Kakashi assured the Hokage. The only other person he was pretty sure at least wanted Sakura in good health. Tsunade nodded, and moved on to help Neji set up camp for the first night. Sakura, could you please come here? Tsunade asked, tone brooking no argument. Not that the robot like Sakura was seemingly capable of that at the moment. Sakura nodded, and Tsunade continued. Do you know where in Wave Naruto is most likely to go? Tsunade waited a moment for Sakura's reply. He'd go to Tazuna and his family. They assumed basic command of the mercantile wave state after Gatu's control collapsed. Sakura's response was informational and monotonic. Tsunade sighed, and said to her, cheer up, you'll get to see him again soon. Tsunade didn't realize that Naruto wasn't the one she wanted to see again, but he might lure out the one she did want to see. Hinata had taken Kaori's words of needing to be bolder to heart. She had surprised even herself when she attached herself to Naruto's side, but neither party complained. Naruto had his arm around her shoulder, and she had hers on his waist. Kaori must have been the only one who saw them as a couple, because the rest of the people just smiled when they saw 2 good friends walking together. Gatu may be gone, but there would always be someone who wanted to do others harm. Naruto directed the pair into a clothing shop, one called The Outdoorsman. He needed new clothes, and he wouldn't be able to replace some of them in Wave. He'd have to wait until he got to a ninja village. He paused a moment on that thought. He had to masquerade himself as a homeless ninja, one who no longer belonged anywhere, to allow himself passage into any village who was less than friendly with Konoha. He'd have to buff smooth his SP to pass as one. And he'd either have to get Hinata to do the same, or at least just hide hers. They walked around the store, Naruto carrying a basket to hold his clothing choices in. He'd seen a dark crimson windbreaker on sale that he'd really liked. It had a collar he could flip up in case of storms, and even had a hood he could zip into a hidden pocket. The jacket was almost too big for him, his fingers barely sticking out the end, but he reasoned it was a good idea because he was apparently going to be growing quite a bit in these next weeks and months. He hadn't seen much else he'd like, namely a shirt to go underneath, until a sign caught his eye. Muscle tees. 2 for 1 sale. Naruto liked the sound of that. Muscle tees were notorious for ripping in intense situations, but they kept the bugs off the skin they covered. And for that deal he could afford 8 or 10 of the silly things. Hinata went a little flush at the sight of him in a muscle tee, but it quickly passed when Naruto put his windbreaker back on over it. The shirt and jacket combo clashed rather badly with the green and brown camouflage pattern on his pants, but he just simply ignored it. He was going to buy some more pants anyways. Naruto looked at Hinata and realized something. Aren't you hot in that jacket? Nights in Konoha might call for it, but here in Wave I'd think it was too hot. Hinata's face went pale. He wanted her to take off her jacket? She knew that the only reason she wore it was to conceal her body, but she didn't like the way other boys looked at her when she didn't wear it. She was told by her mother that she had grown up rather quickly, and had a body more like an 18-year-old than a 14-year-old. She was just a very short 18-year-old. Hinata decided to lie. I'm fine, Naruto-kun. I am not hot. Naruto looked at her and Hinata froze under his scrutiny. You're lying. Hinata's eyes went wide. How'd he know? It's okay if you don't want to take off the jacket, I just thought you'd be too hot with it on. Naruto shrugged and went back to browsing through the canvas pantaloons he'd found, looking for a few pairs that fit him. Hinata stood there for a moment, before remembering what Kaori had told her, something she wanted to listen to. Surprise him. Hinata quickly took off the jacket, and told Naruto. You're right, maybe it is too warm to wear this jacket. Naruto nodded, and pulled off 3 pairs of pantaloons, and put them in the basket. He turned around, and saw why Hinata was wearing that jacket. My, isn't she a big girl? Naruto was instantly upon Kyuubi, hoping to stem the flood of images he knew were sure to follow that statement. Don't you dare, Fox, I will. Damn it. Why are you doing this to me? Aren't you supposed to be busy? Naruto felt him smile. Of course I'm busy, but that doesn't mean I can't harass you at the same time. Naruto put his head in his hand. Do you want me to put the coat back on? Hinata said, quietly, not liking some of the attention she was already drawing. Naruto shook his head. No, don't. I've got something to talk to you about that will make a whole lot of things make sense. Naruto steeled himself to remember to tell Hinata about Kyuubi. Hinata smiled, if faintly. Naruto was going to entrust her with a secret. She dared not hope, but knew that this was a step in the right direction. I'm going to go browse, okay Naruto? Naruto smirked. Be back in 10 minutes, or you're in trouble. Naruto gave her a look that nearly froze her in place. She isn't ready for me to tease her yet, it seems. Naruto's face softened. I was just teasing you, Hinata. Go enjoy yourself. Hinata unfroze and blushed. She hurried away quickly. She was going to need new clothes, after all. Naruto sighed. Maybe he wouldn't need as much time as he thought. Temari was exhausted. They'd been running and tree hopping for most of the day. It was late afternoon, and she was pretty sure that they were a good 2/3 the way to Wave. She was also positive that she nor Kankuro could take another step. Gaara must have realized this when he came back to see where they were. You two make camp. I will return after I have seen Naruto. If I am not back by morning, come looking for me in Wave's main city. Temari gave him a faint nod, and began setting up the one tent that they had between them. It was large enough to house them all, and she and Kankuro wouldn't be sleeping on top of each other if they had to share it. Good thing too. She never did like sleeping right next to him. Gaara picked up his pace, and moved out towards the Wave village. He wanted to talk to Naruto one last time before Naruto was chased off by the leaf nen he was sure were at least a day behind him, maybe 2. He wanted to know what he could do without Shukaku dictating every movement of his life. After a half an hour of the breakneck pace he was putting out, he saw something out the corner of his eye. It was well concealed, but he knew it when he saw it, a camp. However, there was something off about it. Two large toads were standing very still. One was apparently asleep, and they looked to be guarding the camp. He vaguely remembered from his battle with Naruto that Naruto summoned toads. Maybe this was his camp. Hold, Huip, it's you. Gamakichi squealed, instantly waking Gamatachi. What's going on? Gamatachi said. Gaara's here. What'll we do? Gamakichi and Gamatachi hugged and huddled away from the very confused Gaara. You will tell me where Naruto is. He didn't recognize these toads, but apparently they recognized him. Either Naruto or his sensei had summoned them during their battle, mostly likely Naruto. The toads relaxed. He went into town, Gamatachi quickly admitted. Gaara nodded and started to walk away. He remembered something Tamari had told him about thanking someone for doing what you asked of them. He decided to try it out and see what happened. Thank you, he uttered, over his shoulder. The toads were stunned. You're welcome? Gamakichi tested. Gaara nodded and then was off at the pace he'd had before getting to the camp. Naruto saw that it was fairly late in the afternoon. He nodded to himself and decided to wrap up the clothing shopping. He'd found the muscle tees, windbreaker and pantaloons, but also bought a fisherman's vest, flannel shirt, fisherman's hat, waterproofed canvas fishing pants and fishing boots as a disguise. He thought it was pretty ingenious. Hinata had surprised him with a few purchases of her own. She had namely bought a large coat that came down to her knees. It was similar to his windbreaker. It was like she was also expecting to grow. It was dark green in color with several pockets adorning the outside and a few on the inside. She'd bought several dark shirts that were simply baggy and hid her distracting figure rather well. She hadn't bought any pants, but he figured she must have had some with her in her stuff. They'd paid for their purchases, and were carrying them back to their campsite, which they were going to pack up and move to Tazuna's house, when Naruto remembered that his sword was going to be done now. Hinata, I've got one last errand I need to do before we go back to camp. Do you mind going on ahead by yourself? She shook her head, and went off to take her stuff to the campsite. Naruto smiled and went to collect his new sword. Oi! He shouted. He knew that the woman from before would probably be the one to come and talk to him if he shouted like that. Ah, you're back. We're putting the finishing touches on it right now. Come have a look. Naruto followed her to the back of the smithy, and saw that one of her students was quickly and professionally etching Second Dawn in proper kanji into the thinner blade. Naruto smiled. It really was a different sword, wasn't it? The blade itself was still as long as he remembered, about 7 feet in length, plus the 3-foot handle. The handle was much darker now, probably made from mahogany or a deeply stained cherry, but it was still functional. Can I get a wrap for the sword? The lady feigned insult. You think we wouldn't have wraps for swords this large? Naruto smiled at her act. I'll take a black one, if you've got it. She nodded and pulled out a gargantuan piece of black fabric, and as soon as the student was done etching, showed Naruto how to wrap the sword up. As soon as he had put the sword on his shoulder, however, he nearly dropped it in surprise. Naruto, we need to talk. Naruto jumped into the air and pointed Second Dawn at the intruder. Gaara, don't do that. Naruto saw the severity in his eyes, and knew there was trouble on the horizon. Naruto had led Gaara back to the camp where Hinata, Gamakichi and Gamatachi were busily packing everything up. Gamatachi kept putting the wrong clothes in the wrong bag, and Gamakichi was trying his hardest not to eat the young pair's food. Gamakichi, pick up the pace, we're going to need to move even sooner than I anticipated. Naruto said, and just began to shove random articles of clothing into one of the 2 bags. The Toad twins and Hinata followed suit. I suspect that it will be Tsunade herself that leads this team. She was quite upset when she heard that they'd dispatched Mizuki to come and kill you. Naruto perked an eyebrow and paused for a moment. She was angry? Gaara nodded at Naruto's question. She was furious and gave the Council of Elders a piece of her mind. They'd sent Mizuki without her authorization. Gaara watched as the emotions played out over Naruto's face. So the old hag isn't out to get me. That's reassuring, but I'm not going back. Ever. There is no force that can bind me to that village. I won't harm them, but they need to take care of themselves now. Naruto picked up the bag he'd filled to the brim, and he started taking apart the tents. The Toad twins were helping Hinata with the remaining supplies and clothes. I will try to avoid them. I don't think that would be a possibility or a good idea. Facing them down would prevent them from following you too soon, and allow you to make a getaway. Naruto glared at what he thought Gaara was implying. I didn't say kill them. Incapacitate them for several hours and then disappear. That's all it would take is what I'm saying. Naruto nodded, the plan Gaara suggesting settling better in his mind. I'll try that. But first, I need to figure out where to go. Naruto sat down and began neatly stuffing the tent into its bag. You will be welcome in hidden sand. Gaara almost looked hopeful, and Naruto shook his head. It's a nice offer, but they would expect me to go somewhere that I had friends. If I want to disappear, I need to go somewhere they won't think I go. Gaara gravely nodded at his friend's grim resolve. He had no suggestions and he held his silence because of it. The packers finished after a few moments, and they and Gaara began to head back into Wave Country proper. Naruto looked over at Gaara and said, "Where are your siblings? They will come to Wave Country in the morning. It appears that they cannot run like you or I can." Naruto nodded. They were only going at half pace, but Hinata was having trouble keeping up. He dismissed the Toad twins, and they managed to make it back to Wave Country in time for dinner. Tsunade awoke with a kink in her low back. She slowly hobbled to the embers of the campfire and heaped more wood on the smoldering embers. She then used a simple fire jutsu to get the fire roaring. She started to heat some water up when Kakashi woke up. "I've got a bit of odd news." He started, staring more at the fire than her. "Odd news is better than bad, right?" Tsunade pulled the now hot water off the fire and poured it into a water skin, which she then held to her low back. Kakashi nodded. "Hopefully. Sakura seems to be dreaming about Sasuke. She's honestly said more around me asleep than she has awake." Kakashi paused as if to compose his thoughts. What kind of dream does she seem to be having? Kakashi shook his head. Other than something autoerotic? I've got no idea what she's dreaming about. We'll probably need Ino or someone to dig around in her head. Tsunade considered this possibility. Ino would be able to extract the needed information about what the heck is going on in Sakura's head. She didn't need a crazy genin on her hands in such a delicate situation. I'll ask Ino sometime today. Kakashi nodded at Tsunade's idea. The other genin were stirring. It was time to eat breakfast and get moving. Tsunade was determined to get Naruto back. She wouldn't let anything get in her way. She just hoped that Naruto wanted to come back after all this mess. Tazuna-san, Tazuna-san. Naruto knocked at the door of the house. It was in the same place it had been the last time he'd been in Wave, but apparently being in control of a mercantile state had its benefits. The house had eaten a couple of its next-door neighbors and they had built a wall all the way around the premises. Naruto heard footsteps. "I'm sorry, Tazuna isn't in right now. He's at, oh." Naruto. Tsunami was very surprised to see Naruto and two people she'd never seen before on her doorstep. "Hello, Tsunami. May we come in?" Naruto asked. Tsunami was stunned for a moment, before letting them in. Wasn't Naruto shorter than this? "Of course, come in, come in. Tazuna is busy at the government office. Inari's in school. Would you like some dinner?" The group nodded and took up places in the kitchen to where they could all see and hear Tsunami. "May I ask what brings you to Wave, Naruto?" Tsunami's question was innocent enough, but it brought up things Naruto wasn't done digesting. He replied without giving too much away. "Unrest in Konoha." Tsunami knew that tone well. It was the one Tazuna used when he wasn't ready or willing to talk about a subject. She quickly shifted gears and motioned at Hinata and Gaara. "Who are your friends?" Naruto looked at the two, and looked for nods. He got them both from Hinata and Gaara, and continued. "He is Subaku no Gaara. He's from Hidden Sand. We met under less than ideal circumstances during the Chunin exams." Gaara nodded again. He moved on. "She is Hyuga Hinata. She's from a noble family in Konoha, but I don't think that is telling you much about her. She's not treated very well by most of her family, and simply followed me here." As the words came tumbling out of his mouth, Naruto realized that Hinata needed him a lot more than he thought. Hiashi wouldn't take lightly to Hinata running off like this. "How do you do?" Tsunami said, politely nodding to them before turning back to her meal preparations. "I will go and see if my siblings have arrived in the village yet," Gaara said, stepping out of the room. Tsunade thought for a moment to stop him before receiving a shake of the head from Naruto. Won't do you any good to try and stop him. He rarely takes orders from others. Tsunade nodded, and added more food to her preparations. Hinata moved in. Let me help. Tsunade was grateful for the extra hands, and every now and again, she would stop Hinata from adding a spice, or add one the girl suggested she add. Naruto just fell into the background and began thinking. Alright, Gaara said that Tsunade was leading the team. Probably not going to be a violent confrontation, at the very least, not at first. I wonder who she's brought with her. Probably brought along as many faces who want you to come back as she could round up in the short amount of time she had. Naruto nodded at that. That'll be what, 4 or 5 faces? Maybe 6? I doubt she'd bring non-ninja along. The road between Wave and Leaf is still really dangerous. He looked out the window to see Gaara talking to someone on the other side of the wall. You two are slow, Gaara said, no inflection in his voice. Kankuro spoke up. I think, there's a difference, between us, being normal, and you, being insanely fast. Gaara looked at his brother with surprise. He'd never spoken out like that before. He found his brother's new attitude towards him liberating. Perhaps. Come inside quickly. Gaara jumped down off the wall, his siblings following a moment later. Once all of the ninja got inside, they all sat around the table in Tsunade's dining room, waiting for Hinata and Tsunade to bring the dinner out. They'd offered to help, but the two girls took up most of the kitchen as it was. After a peaceable meal, Naruto pulled Hinata off to the side. It was time for him to keep his promise. Remember how I said I had something to tell you, Hinata? She nodded her head and he continued. You remember the Kyuubi, right? And how the Yondaime killed it 13 years ago. Hinata nodded her head again. All the children at the academy had learned of the Yondaime Hokage's sacrifice to destroy the demon that was running rampant in the village. Why are you telling me this? Hinata asked, wondering where this was going. The Kyuubi isn't dead. The 4 words sent a shock through Hinata's system. That monster was still free to roam, kill innocents. The Yondaime couldn't kill him, but he could seal it away. And he sealed it. Naruto picked up his shirt and flowed chakra right through his navel. Right here. Hinata went wide-eyed. The cheerful and energetic boy she loved was the vessel for such a murderous creature? She went slack against the wall. It was a bit overwhelming, to say the least. I'll understand if you want to return to Hidden Leaf, Naruto said quietly. Hinata's head snapped up, but she made no other movements. A little voice in the back of her head came alive. Surprise him. Hinata lunged forward and almost knocked Naruto off balance. He looked down at the girl to see that she was tearing up. He almost spoke when he heard her soft question. Are you? Naruto smiled and nodded. I'm me. That's all I need to hear. Hinata said, and stood up to a more graceful stance. Naruto tightened the embrace. Thank you for being so accepting, Haim-chan. Hinata blushed at the nickname, but didn't say anything. Well, I'll be darned. You disappear off the edge of the world for a few months and lo and behold, you come back with a girlfriend. Naruto and Hinata both jumped at the new voice. It was after dark and all. Who wouldn't expect the owner of the house to there at that hour? Tazuna, Tsunade's already told me everything I think I need to hear. You two just scurry on up to meet your friends to go to bed. You've had a rough day. Naruto smiled in gratitude to the old man. But he almost wanted to strangle the man when he shouted up the stairs. And don't do anything Tsunade's gonna have to clean up after. Hinata nearly fainted at the comment, and Naruto tried to block out the deluge of images that Kyuubi was sending his way, showing how to accomplish that without the normal mess. You're an obnoxious git, you know that? Naruto could only hear the sound of Kyuubi's laughter. Tsunade went about her business setting up the camp. Most of the genin she had with her were utterly exhausted. She had given them a hard march to get them past the 2/3 point so it wouldn't be nightfall when they arrived in Wave Country. It was time. She'd kept Ino talking until all the genin were fast asleep. She motioned for Kakashi to join her, and she started talking. Alright, now that everyone else is asleep, I can propose this to you. Ino sat up a little straighter. What would the Hokage want to tell her that she'd wait for everyone to go to sleep before telling her? Something is wrong with Sakura. It may be nothing, it could be she's plotting to kill us. All I know is that something is very wrong and she won't speak of it. And I think we need to know before we take her to see Naruto, in case her seeing him will make it worse. Ino nodded. Knowing your friends was a good step in the direction of staying alive. Alright, What do you want me to look for? She asked, wanting to go to bed. Anything out of the ordinary in dreamland. Tsunade said. Ino looked at her, and smiled. Everything is out of the ordinary in dreamland. But I know what you mean. Let's make this fast, I want to get to sleep. Ino moved to cast the jutsu she had used in the Chunin exams to invade Sakura's dreaming mind. She was embarrassed to watch Sakura's debauchery in person, but she hadn't noticed her yet, so she just enjoyed the show, watching for anything out of the ordinary. Hello. That was weird. The dream ought to ignore her until Sakura noticed her. You don't belong here. The strange figure was now in front of her. It looked vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place him. I will eliminate you now. The cloaked figure raised a kunai, and she knew it was time to run. She had found something out of place in Sakura's mind, now just to ascertain what in blazes it was. It won't hurt for too long. I promise. The cackling voice behind her didn't reassure. As she ran, she began to think. There's a something invading her mind, and she's dreaming about Sasuke. She looked over her shoulder, and saw that wherever the mysterious figure stepped, it seemed to reconfigure the world around it. And whatever's in here, it's reshaping Sakura's mind. Wait, reshaping? There aren't too many ninja who can do something like that. It's got to be. Ino's thoughts were cut off as the figure caught her and roughly shoved her up. The force of the expulsion from Sakura's mind was sufficient enough to knock Ino over and to the verge of consciousness. Before she lost her grip on reality completely, she heard a few final words. You will remember none of this, and you will not do this again. And Ino couldn't help but agree. Tsunade was alarmed when she saw Ino fly out of Sakura's tent. She went over to check on the girl, and found that physically, she wasn't injured. She just hoped that Ino would be okay. When she felt she could do no more, she and Kakashi turned in for the night. Dreaming a few dozen miles away, Naruto shifted in his sleep. That voice was back and wasn't leaving him alone. Naruto was wandering about in a dense fog bank. There were no reference points except random points of light that stubbornly remained in the distance. He couldn't tell if he was going in a straight line or in a circle or any other random shape. And that voice continued to repeat itself. Mist, 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 what about the damn mist? Naruto shouted, hoping to get a response from the voice. Instead, the voice wavered, sounding like it was shifting between radio channels. The message was a bit clearer now, but something still seemed to be missing. Come to mist, come to mist, come to mist, come to mist, hidden mist? Naruto asked, but he felt a pulling sensation, heralding the morning, before he could get an answer to his question. Hey Kyuubi? What, Kit? Were you paying attention during that dream I was having? Kyuubi snorted. I guess you mean the last one, right? Because I don't think you'd talk to me about the other ones. Naruto felt like he should be embarrassed, but passed it off as just one of those nagging impressions. What was going on there? Someone was trying to contact you, but they're really far away. Naruto began muttering to himself. Someone wants me to go to Hidden Mist. But why? Well, it gives me a convenient direction to go in if I need to leave. Naruto kipped up and silently left the room. The sun was just rising, so he knew he was waking up earlier than he normally did. He walked towards the noises that were coming from the kitchen. He startled the still sleepy Tsunami. Naruto, dear child, you need to learn to make more noise in the morning. Naruto grumbled something about getting killed, and Tsunami just resumed cooking. The others, less sleepily than Naruto but still as silent, shuffled their way into the breakfast room, and began to munch on things that they had brought down with them. Tsunami, seeing that extra food would probably not be needed, decided to not make more food. Kit, I'm ready. Naruto was startled in full awakeness. He turned inward to talk to the fox. For the whole merging thing? Yes. This one is a long shot, so we'll need to try this again at least once, but most likely more times than that. How close should people be? Naruto didn't want something he was doing to harm anyone. People should stand well back. One or two should be nearby, just to make sure you don't go crazy. Hinata should be able to stem any rogue chakra flows. Naruto nodded. And Gaara, he'd be able to pin us down if we started to flail about. We don't want to hurt ourselves, now do we? Naruto got up and made his way to the door. Gaara, Hinata, can I borrow some of your time? The two walked over to him slowly. He dropped into a low whisper. Kyuubi has come up with a good deal for the both of us. He is no longer an immediate danger to those around me. I think I've tempered him out just a bit. But what I'm about to do, I'll need you two to keep me from hurting myself. I need you to run crowd control and make sure no one gets too close. Kyuubi doesn't even know how this is going to turn out. Gaara looked at him confidently, and took up a position to keep interlopers from coming out. This was going to be an undoubtedly loud event. Hinata seemed less sure. Will this hurt you? Change you? Hinata asked quietly, concern pouring out her eyes. Naruto gave her one of his electric smiles. Hurt me? I'll probably pass out from the pain. As for change, it will only be superficial. I'll not be any different after this, but I'll look it. Hinata gave him a hug and squeezed tight. Her resolve at least to the point of seeing this through, she took a position a few feet from his side. Naruto laid down in a dirt patch, not want to disturb the local flora too much. It's go time. Naruto gave the Kyuubi the affirmative. Houston, T-3 seconds and counting. Naruto was instantly confused. What? Kyuubi sniggered. Something from before your time. And then, without any further ado, it began. Red chakra stormed out of every pore on Naruto's body, some like foxtails, other like foxheads. The chakra would coalesce into larger shapes on occasion, but other than that, didn't do a whole lot. And then, Naruto started screaming. Everyone on the inside of the house, including Tazuna and Inari, ran outside. Gaara used his sand tendrils to restrain them. No. Hinata can stop the chakra, and I can overpower it. You'll only get hurt getting close. Most people stopped struggling after this comment, but Inari was still trying to get over to the person he thought was dying. The process was rather painful, after all. Let me go. I gotta help. Tsunami took Inari from the sand hand which held him, and spoke to him softly. I think he doesn't need it. He's got Hinata and Gaara to make sure nothing's going to go wrong. Tsunami threw a worried glance at Naruto. At least, I hope. Gaara nodded his head. It has not gone wrong yet. Suddenly, form of Kyuubi's head appeared over Naruto's body. Hinata was startled at the sudden manifestation. Subaku no Gaara, I would have a word with you. Gaara turned and looked at the head that was floating a few feet off the ground. What do you need, Kistune? Gaara said in his usually terse form. The Kyuubi head jerked to the left a little and raised Naruto's arm. I haven't much time, so I will make this simple. Akatsuki is trying to capture the Court of Tails. Shukaku can tell you what this implies. Take this scroll and do as I have done. We will hide ourselves in these human bodies to keep our power from those who cannot wield it. The chakra bent in on itself 1, twice, 4, 10, 100 times, and coalesced into a scroll in Naruto's hand. Gaara moved and grabbed the scroll from his hand. I know what to do now. I only need to get back, and just as suddenly as it had appeared, the head disappeared into Naruto's body. And it began to change. Naruto began to get visibly taller and his hair turned a more orange shade. The whisker marks on his face got thicker for a moment, and then went back to being their normal self. Scarlet sigils began popping up on his body. On his cheek and his hand were ones that the onlookers could make out. They then faded back into his rapidly tanning skin. And just as it had started, it stopped. Hinata bent over him and looked for signs of life. Breathing. Good. Heartbeat. Good. Open eyes. That's very good. Naruto sat up, and murmured to where only Hinata and Gaara could hear. And so, it begins. He turned his head and looked straight at something. Only he was aware that he was staring straight at Tsunade. Tsunade awoke with a start. She could feel eyes on her. She was instantly on her feet and looking about the outside of the tent. She could only see birds and other small woodland creatures occasionally pausing to look at her. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was so weird too. It felt like Naruto was watching her. However, she forgot about the feeling she was being watched as soon as Kakashi came back from his morning exercises. Hokage-sama, I have some bad news. Tsunade frowned. I don't like bad news. What is it? Sakura is gone, he said quietly as to not cause the still sleepy genin to wake up. Tsunade put her face in her hand. This trip was getting more complicated by the minute. Go and find her. I'll take the remaining genin into wave with me. Kakashi nodded and departed. Kakashi ran as if Kyuubi himself were chasing him. He'd picked up Sakura's trail by the random bits of red cloth and the dropped shuriken. Had he not also found blood on the ground, he might have thought that Sakura had wanted someone to follow her to wherever she was going. After a while, the tracks petered out. She'd stopped bleeding all over the place a few miles back, and he's just now found what had to be her last shuriken. I was awed that he hadn't found any kunai. He knew Sakura carried them on her person, but he had yet to see one. But enough of that, Kakashi knew he had to act quickly or risk losing the trail. Kachiyose no jutsu. Instantly, 3 dogs, including Pakun, stood before him. Take a good sniff, guys. I think the physical trail is drying up, and I'm going to need your help to get through this. Pakun and the dogs nodded harshly and then proceeded to sniff the various strips of cloth presented to them. Pakun was the first one to pick the trail back up, and everyone began to follow his lead. Several hours passed, and Kakashi wondered just when Sakura had decided to get up and run off. She should either have passed out somewhere along the trail she was on, or she was running at a rate comparable or faster than his. He thought back to Ino's rough ejection from Sakura's mind. Something like that didn't happen, even from a very strong-willed person. There had to be another jutsu interfering or something. Kakashi paled at the thought. Sakura knew way too many things about Konoha for her to fall into the wrong hands. The only enemy who wouldn't have much to gain was Sound because they already had Sasuke. But who would take Sakura by mind control? The silver-haired ninja pulled out a scroll and ink pen and began to write a report, in detail, about all the things he had found, including his hypothesis that Sakura was being controlled. Kakashi. Pakun's voice drew him up from his letter. Sakura was nowhere to be seen, so something else had to be amiss. What is it, Pakun? Her trail stops cold right here. Pakun stood next to an odd swirl mark in the upper dirt. Not many things could do that, but Kakashi's Junin mind had already narrowed it down to the top culprits until one popped up in his mind. The leaf teleport skill. Any of the other teleport skills would have left scorches or damp ground or sand. Only the leaf teleport skill would leave behind something so damn near invisible. Can you tell me anything else? Pakun nodded. I smelled Kabuto. Kakashi frowned. Sound had kidnapped Sakura? Why? He couldn't even begin to fathom a reason. They didn't need medics. Sakura had no truly valuable information. Sasuke wouldn't want her there and wouldn't have tried to retrieve her, and nothing else would come to him as even unviable reasons. He pointed at one of the 3 nin dogs. You will take this scroll back to where we came from. Follow my scent back to a campsite with lots of other smells, and then follow those smells north. Give this to the older blonde. Understood? The dog quietly nodded and Kakashi strapped the scroll to the dog's side, and after a moment of getting used to it, was off like a shot. We 3 will scout out the remaining area. The skill used only has an effective radius of about a mile. He pulled out 2 explosive tags out of his vest and gave one to each of the dogs. Set this off and stand well back when you find something. Be sure not to blow whatever it is you found up. Clear? The dogs nodded in unison, and Kakashi felt reassured, if only a little bit, for the first time that morning. Pakun, you go southeast. I'll go dead north, and you will go southwest. Everyone move clockwise from your position until one of us finds something. Move out. All 3 ninja moved out simultaneously. I hope we find you. I can't stand the thought of losing my last pupil, even if she is being difficult and rather foolish right now. Tsunade had awoken everyone but Ino so that they could go ahead and get things like breakfast and packing out of the way. She watched the girl for a moment before thinking back to the prior evening. Ino had flown out of the tent as if she'd been slugged, but she hadn't even touched Sakura, so it couldn't have been an unconscious reaction to touch. Ino was in Sakura's mind. The last time Sakura had just simply ejected her, not knocked her over a good 10 yards. She broke out of her reverie when she heard the girl wake up. We've been worried. Ino looked at her sleepily, but like she'd grown a second head. Why? Ino looked at the Hokage, who was slack-jawed. You flew out of the tent last night. That's why. Ino looked truly confused by the Hokage's words. Why was I thrown out of the tent? Ino was truly curious and Tsunade was truly stumped. You don't remember going into Sakura's head last night? Ino looked shocked. Why would I want to? If I had, it was probably contaminated with something. Ino looked revulsed at the idea, and then stopped. Why am I repulsed by that thought? Tsunade's expression darkened. What could not only knock you out of Sakura's mind, send you flying several yards, erase the memory of the event from your head, and make you not want to go back? Ino looked straight at the Hokage at that. Assuming all of what you're saying is true, only my father can force me out that I know personally. Other than that, it would either be someone who is well versed in genjutsu and knew someone like me would be around or someone with a psychic blood limit. Ino finished, trying to get her head around this problem. Tsunade sighed. Great. All we know now is that someone is tampering with Sakura's head. This is just perfect. Tsunade threw up her hands. Eat breakfast and pack up your stuff. We need to get going. I've got this feeling that we're going to need Naruto now more than ever. Fortunately for Tsunade, the rest of the day would progress without incident. As she arrived in Wave Country, however, that would all change. Naruto seemed distant for most of that day. Both Gaara and Hinata didn't think much of it because they knew what was going on. Inari, on the other hand. What have you done with my Aniki? Inari screamed, simultaneously beating his arms on Naruto's shins and kicking his feet. Naruto smiled down at him. Less than you accusing me of. I'm sorry, Inari, but I've got a conversation to finish. Naruto got up and walked off, Inari chasing after him, only to be stopped by Tsunami. I think it would behoove all the rest of us if you explain what is going on. Gaara and Hinata made eye contact. Hinata shied away, but gave curt nod to Gaara, who proceeded to explain. I assume you are all familiar with the Kyuubi attack on Konoha 14 years ago? The three family members nodded, as did the other Sand siblings. Kyuubi Kitsune did not die that day, as Konoha claims. It is merely tucked away inside a human being. Naruto Uzumaki is the jinchuriki for Kitsune no Kyuubi. Gaara then turned his harsh gaze on Inari, who squirmed in his mother's arms to get out from under it. Naruto and Kyuubi have come to an understanding that one cannot live without the other, and thus, Kyuubi has come up with a way to make sure that Naruto can defend them both. Don't ask how. All I know is, Naruto is about to become powerful. Gaara shrugged. The nonchalant Gaara was a lot better, in his siblings' opinion, that the bloodthirsty, Shukaku-controlled Gaara they'd grown up with. The wave natives nodded their heads and began busying themselves with other things. Meanwhile, Naruto sat down and began to meditate. Kyuubi. Kyuubi wasn't very busy at the moment trying anything new with the Yondaime's seal. Naruto's body needed to grow quite a bit to accommodate all his power, so he would have to wait a few years. But that didn't mean he couldn't help by infusing the boy with it bit by bit. You wanted to teach me something? Naruto was curious as to what the Kyuubi had to teach him. After all, they'd covered almost all of the new changes that were being wrought on his body by the first infusion. I'm going to teach you a few ninjutsu. Alright, now the first one is Naruto interrupted the demon lord. Wait, back up, you know ninjutsu. Kyuubi snorted. You try living in the navel of a boy who lives in a ninja village and get really bored. See what drifts through your mind. Hopefully, it's nothing as wrong as what drifts through your mind at other opportune moments. Naruto could feel the Kyuubi become indignant. Now that's not nice. You know you're thinking them too. Naruto frowned. He knew that Kyuubi was telling the truth. Didn't mean he had to like it. You were saying? I was saying that I had developed a few techniques that you're ready for. These jutsu, however, are very dangerous, and should only be brandished against an opponent that's trying to disable or kill you. Naruto nodded, both internally and externally. Right. The first skill is the air wake skill. Time passes, and it's early afternoon. Kyuubi was able to give Naruto 4 jutsu to swallow up in the small amount of time, and had moved to becoming more proficient with the large sword he'd inherited. He didn't feel even like an advanced student with it, but he felt confident enough with it that if he had to use it in combat, he wouldn't lop his own limbs off with it. He was interrupted when a sentry came running into the middle of the living space, calling for Tazuna. Tazuna-san. Tazuna came rushing down. Kensuke, what is it? The young man looked at the most powerful man in the village he lived in, saluted, and then moved to give his report. The Hokage is at the gates. She is demanding entry. We've got the doors sealed up tight, but knowing Tsunade's strength. Tazuna grimly nodded. If the Hokage hadn't wanted to keep in good light with Wave, those doors would have done nothing to stop her from getting in here. Naruto spoke up before he could respond. Tell her to stand well back from the gates, along with anyone she's got with her. I'll be along in a few minutes. Open the gates when I get there. Kensuke looked at Tazuna, seeking what really to do. Tazuna looked at Naruto and asked, Are you sure? Naruto nodded his confirmation, and Tazuna turned back to Kensuke. Do as he says. He's going to keep his word, so you won't look the part of the fool. Kensuke ran off at top speed to inform the gatekeeper. Naruto, knowing he had little time, turned to Gaara. Gaara, I wished that this time wasn't here yet. You and I coulda had so much fun. Naruto smiled for a minute, and then it faded. I don't get to stop running just yet. But you can. Take your siblings back sand and become Case Cage. Naruto smiled. I believe in you, and I know you want to help me. That is what you can do to help me. Gaara nodded, and then in a sudden motion, clutched his head. Naruto was quickly at his side. Gaara, what's going on? Gaara was in such a state, however, that Naruto's words fell on deaf ears. It seems that Shukaku wants to talk. Naruto moved a step back and fell into communication with Kyuubi. Talk? That creature? Now, he's not really that bad. At least, in terms of being a demon. He's the new kid on the block. Besides, he was sort of my sidekick a few centuries ago. Let me out so I can speak to him. Naruto trusted Kyuubi, but not Shukaku. He knew he was powerful enough to stop Shukaku from rampaging, so he complied. Red chakra slipped from his inner coils and formed a fox-shaped mask around his face. Let him speak, Subaku. He cannot harm us while I am here. Gaara heard this and he slumped over in relief. A small amount of sand moved to form a tanuki-shaped mask around his face. Kyuubi, what's going on? Why are you doing? Ya know, that. Whatever it was that the tanuki was talking about, it was obviously distasteful. However, Kyuubi had an immediate answer. To keep Akatsuki from resurrecting the Court of Suns. They were only 3 demons, but you know how much they liked destruction. Thank you very much, but I like to leave something to destroy the next day. They had no concept of a half measure for their own enjoyment. All of that aside, you know that they wanted us dead anyways. I'm keeping the power away from Akatsuki. They may get me but they won't get my power. At these words, the Tanuki seemed to grasp that this was a very bad thing. But I don't know how. It was odd to see someone like Shukaku whine like that. Most humans in the room sweat dropped. That scroll I gave to Gaara details everything you need to know. I need to go now, to make sure that the old hag doesn't get my container. And with that both masks fell back into the place they belonged. Naruto and Gaara nodded to each other, and then quickly went their separate ways. We have work to do, siblings. The Sand siblings were gone in an instant. Naruto moved to the door, Hinata following close behind. I don't want to hurt you with some of the bigger jutsu I might use. Just stand well back, okay? Hinata nodded. Naruto finished attaching second dan to his back, and the two were off in a flash. Tsunade was getting impatient. These wave folk were keeping her out. Never mind that she was Hokage, she just wanted to barge in and grab Naruto by the ear and have it go back to the way it was, with their almost familial bickering. However, when she got wind that someone who knew them had told them to step back from the gates, she began to get hopeful. It was at very least Tazuna, but hopefully it was Naruto. The gates opened after a few moments. A lone figure was walking towards them from quite a distance off. She nodded at Neji, who activated his Byakugan, to see who it was. It's Naruto, I think. Tsunade turned and looked at the Hyuga prodigy. Give me a straight answer please. If Naruto had orange hair, it'd be him. Tsunade looked back again and saw that the figure did indeed have thick, spiky orange hair. Gone was the old, orange jumpsuit, and in its place was something more akin to standard ninja wear. Albeit, it was still a gaudy chad of crimson. As he approached, the group from Konoha found that he had some large object strapped on his back. None of the group had faced Zabuza or Kisame, so they didn't recognize the bundle as a sword, not even Tenten. Naruto silently came up to the arc of the gate and stood defiantly for a few moments. Tsunade didn't speak, fearing she might insult this new person, in the case where it wasn't Naruto, and cause some major debacle. Naruto finally spoke up, loud and clear. I'm not going back. You've traveled in vain. Neji, however, was the first to respond. I have a duty from the Hokage to help retrieve you in any way she deems is safe. However, if what she has told my uncle is true, then I have a deeper mission for clan's sake to bring you home for my cousin. Neji stood and gave his ultimatum. Come back with us Naruto or I will force you back. Naruto let out a short, bitter bark of a laugh. You really don't have all the information, do you? No matter. He made a waving motion with his hand. I have learned a few things in the few days of peace I had, and I want to try them out. I'll take your offer to fight. Naruto drew second dan, still wrapped, from off his back and put it between him and Neji. Tsunade was aghast, so were most of the genin. Naruto was going to fight his own comrades. Just how deep is this hurt? And why didn't I see it sooner? Tsunade wondered to herself and the two young ninja prepared to fight. On some ungiven signal, both ninja were at each other's figurative throats, striking, parrying, blocking, and counter-striking. Neji couldn't get close enough to Naruto because of the large object he was wielding, and Naruto couldn't strike the dancing Neji because he lacked the proficiency with his weapon of choice. Naruto backed off when he saw Neji beginning to form hand seals. Rat, horse, tiger, Kaden, fire spiral skill. The instant he was done exclaiming his technique, a helix of fire shot out to Naruto, spinning and swirling. Naruto smiled. Rabbit, horse, rabbit, ram, Fuuten, vacuum shield skill. There was a flicker of chakra and then nothing. However, when the fire spiral was upon Naruto, it dissipated. Neji saw this and moved to overpower the shield, but no matter how much of his chakra he pumped into the fire spiral, the fire dissipated before it seemed to pass the barrier. After a few moments, Neji stopped trying to overpower Naruto's jutsu, and instead went back in, now that Naruto had lowered the sword, to try and shut down his inner coil system to at least temporarily paralyze him. Stop, Naruto shouted, while putting his hand up in a traditional stopping position. Right into his own shield. His hand exploded in a spray of blood and bone bits, which proceeded to cover Neji in blood. Neji stopped, not wanting something like that to happen to his head. Naruto let the shield down and moved towards Neji, cursing. God damn, that hurts. Motherfucking, grumble. Neji watched in horrid fascination as Naruto's hand regenerated. Quickly, making all sorts of interesting popping noises as the tendons and the bones moved back into place. Naruto quickly reassumed his two-handed grip on Second Dawn as he came past the threshold of the sword's reach, and tried to slam the blunt end into Neji's shoulder to debilitate him. However, Neji reacted regardless of his shock and moved into one of his more signature moves. Kaden. The chakra immediately swirled around his spinning body, repelled the cloth-covered sword, but tore a clean hole in the material. Naruto quickly pulled the cloth off of the sword, revealing it as such to the other members. Naruto smiled. Bad move, Neji. I win. Naruto quickly turned the blade 90 degrees, and swung as hard as his new body would allow him to and ran the side of the blade into the Kaden. The effect was something similar to a cricket player hitting the ball away from himself fairly quickly. Neji ricocheted off a few trees before letting down the Kaden instinctually and stopping bent around the fourth tree. Neji had been knocked unconscious. Ten unconsciously licked her lips. Other than Tsunade, Naruto had just handily beaten down their most powerful ninja. She and the two boys would have to finish this up one way or another. Ino's little head trip, from what the Hokage had told them, had made it hard for her to do anything for several more hours yet. She stepped forward. Please come back, Naruto. Naruto whirled on her and squinted at her. Ten? He asked, as if he barely recognized her. It was true she hadn't had much real contact with the boy, but she felt she had an almost sisterly duty to Hinata to bring Naruto back, if only long enough for the two to run off together. Why the hell are you here? Why do you even care? I don't know you on a personal level, nor you me. He said, his voice spiking in appropriate places. Ten moved forward. You've touched each of us, Naruto. You're inexplicably attached to my friends, and I feel I need to bring you back to them. She stated, hoping she sounded convincing. Naruto didn't buy it for a second. You're only lying to yourself. You don't really care as much as you claim you do. But that's okay. Naruto shrugged, now realizing that Gaara was rubbing off on him. Or maybe it was the fox. Whatever it was, he liked who he was becoming. Lots of people in that village of idiots have been lying to you for God knows how long. It's only right that you lie to yourself. Ten didn't know what to say. Naruto was right when he said she was lying to herself. She didn't really care that much for the boy, but it was important to her to keep her friends happy. So in that respect, she wasn't lying. Shino, Kiba, and Akamaru moved to back her up. Naruto nodded. Try and succeed where Destiny Lad failed. Naruto decided to go for it. He put the unwrapped Second Dawn on his pack and quickly began making hand seals. Dragon, monkey, dragon, rabbit, elephant, Fuuten, air wake skill. The air in front of Naruto suddenly came alive with motion of a gale. Ten, Shino, Kiba and Akamaru all dodged out of the way. However, at the last second, Naruto curved the air funnels slightly and hit Kiba and Akamaru dead on. The ninja and his dog went tumbling head over heels, probably unconscious, if not just incapacitated. 1010 pulled several kunai out of their holsters and launched them at Naruto. She had seen his regenerative factor firsthand. She knew she couldn't truly hurt him with these toys. But all she was really trying to do was get an opening from Shino, who, if she remembered correctly, could eat Naruto's chakra. The problem was that he turned the air wake on her, blowing the kunai away at random angles, a few passing past her and nicking her arms and legs, the wind picking her up and throwing her on the ground, stunning her. Naruto turned on Shino, the air wake skill finally having worn off. "It's just you now." Shino nodded and emitted his bugs. He felt like a bug would about a Rouge Hive member. Bring it back. He would never voice this, but it was how he felt about the situation. Shino quickly brought his bugs to bear. Naruto made a few hand seals and moved to intercept them. Rabbit, horse, rabbit, ram, Fuuten. Vacuum shield skill. Naruto held his arm closer to himself than he did last time, and the chakra flared much more closely to his body than it did last time. Shino's bugs were upon the shield in no time, and at first they showered him in bug guts as they attempted to move through the relatively thick vacuum barrier. However, as the bugs began to march around behind him, he knew that one weakness of this jutsu had been discovered. Not that it wasn't hard to fix. Naruto swiveled around, pumping his arm back and forth in front of him. The bugs behind him began to explode left and right. However, he saw that the bugs were still flowing out of Shino's body and showed no sign of slowing down. This was like trying to kill a single fly with a sledgehammer. He jumped clear of the bugs and looked straight at Hinata's hiding place for a single moment. She'd get hit by the next jutsu, but fortunately, it wasn't a lethal skill, so she'd most likely forgive him. "I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but it's high time I took my leave. It seems that neither in combat or in diplomacy can you even hope to convince me to come back to Konoha." He cast a bit of a saddened look at Tsunade. "I cannot live in a place where my tormentors outnumber those who want to help. I won't live in a place where corrupt officials want to kill me for something they don't try to understand. I will miss those who I've grown close to, but I must move on. He paused for a moment, searching for the words he wanted to use. "I am not your enemy. But I am no longer your friend. Not so long as you can allow the seeds of my enemies to sprout in your hearts." Before Tsunade, Ino or Shino could respond, Naruto made 2 quick seals, and spoke the final words the Konoha nin would hear from him for, hopefully, a long time. Yamaton. Morpheus flash. An instant later, everyone in the vicinity who wasn't already unconscious became so. Naruto quickly dashed back inside the walls of Wave Country's capital and found a guard who hadn't been caught by the flash. "You there? I've got some incapacitated people right outside the gate. Can you get them inside?" he said, shouting to get the man's attention. He nodded and moved to comply, but stopped when he saw that Naruto wasn't following him. "Oi, aren't you going to help me?" But Naruto had already scooped up Hinata and was out of sight before the man resignedly began to drag the people, unceremoniously, inside the walls so that the animals wouldn't begin to chew on them. Naruto jumped over the walls of Tazuna's compound and whispered, "Kai." Hinata began waking up, and after a few moments looked like she was about to talk very loudly. Naruto put a finger over his lips. He whispered, "No, I've got a very short message to give to Tazuna. I'm going to get our packs, and then we're going down to the docks, okay?" Hinata nodded, realizing that silence was necessary here. Naruto got out a scroll and began writing a quick note to Tazuna. Halfway through, he noticed he'd left the black wrap for Second Dawn back at the battlefield. He shrugged. Cloth was cloth, and could be replaced. When Naruto finished his note, he laid it on the table, making sure no one had seen him, grabbed the packs that were lying about, and ran back over to Hinata. Handing her a pack, the two of them hopped back over the wall, and ran down the surprisingly quiet streets of Wave. All the better for them. When they got to the dock, by an unspoken agreement, they separated and Naruto went to buy tickets while Hinata went about collecting information about all the destination ports and everything that was nearby. Only when they were on the boat and in their cabin did Hinata speak up. "Where are we going, Naruto-kun?" she asked, her voice quiet. Naruto, acting out of character for a moment, whispered back, "We're going to Hidden Mist. Someone wants to see me. This is a special section to more thoroughly describe the effects and levels of the jutsu I make up." I don't know much Japanese, so I'm only going to use words that describe a general class of jutsu, like Goken skills or Kaden skills. Tazuna looked down at the figures of the Hokage and the team she had led here. He couldn't help but sigh. Naruto had been hurt and the actions the Hokage had taken, leading a team of ninja here to retrieve him, only worsened the situation. Though it would have been more dangerous, she should have tried to bring all of the civilians who wanted him back, and other people who would have been utterly incapable of defending themselves. It would have been a dangerous journey for them, but would have ultimately succeeded where this group had failed. Tazuna picked up the scroll that Naruto had left behind in his haste. It was addressed to Tsunade, and Tazuna didn't want to invade her privacy by opening the scroll, no matter how much it hurt him on the inside to not open it. Kakashi had come in several minutes ago, panting with a slightly pale complexion, like he'd seen a ghost. Kakashi was in no shape to answer any questions, having run some dozens of miles to report back to Tsunade. He was now resting while Tazuna and his family waited for the Hokage and the other ninja to wake up. Tsunade awoke before the genin team she had with her. She shook her head, as if she was waking up from a particularly deep sleep. She looked about, and snapped awake, realizing she wasn't where she passed out. "You're awake, Hokage-sama," Tazuna commented, and then smiled. "A few messages came in while you were unconscious. The first came in by way of Ninja Dog, but I think it only will say something someone else can simply tell you. I think the next one needs to wait until everyone can hear it. The other one is, resting, waiting for you to come about." He nodded at Kakashi, who motioned the Hokage over to the daybed he was resting on. Kakashi tried a few times to start, but realized that he was still too depleted from running like crazy to even talk. Tsunade realized this and pushed a small amount of chakra into his inner coils, if only enough for him to speak. "Report, Hitaki," she stated. Kakashi began. "I went out, as ordered, to track down Sakura. During most of the morning I found bits and pieces of her clothes and some of her personal weapons strewn about. Late on in the morning, I had to summon 3 ninja dogs to help continue the search. I found evidence that someone used a rather complex teleportation spell to teleport her away. I sent a ninja dog back with a report, but I know you haven't been able to read it yet. The remaining 2 dogs and I spread out and began looking through the forest to find any kind of clue. About 3 hours later, Pakun found something rather disturbing. It was a message written in the blood of 2 people. Or so the message stated anyhow." Kakashi sighed at this and drudged through his memory to find the words of the message. "I have her, and she will never want to leave. She is mine, and I will command her as I deem fit. I have found my calling, my true purpose in life. That is to serve, and I will do all I can to remain with him for all time. We have left your service, Kakashi Hitaki, and will never return. You were weak and have no more to teach us." Kakashi paused, and looked at the Hokage. "I was signed by both Sakura." Kakashi looked like he himself couldn't believe that the other party was involved. "And?" Tsunade prompted. "Sasuke." Sasuke's name was on that paper, and the blood smelled like his to Pakun. Tsunade went wide-eyed. What was this, a sick joke? Why would Sasuke need Sakura anyhow? However, she had little time to wonder as the genin woke up, and she decided to keep this little story under wraps for right now. "Ooh, my head," Akamaru whined alongside his partner. They had taken the main brunt of the force of the airwake and had landed head first. Neji seemed to be awake, but in some severe pain that kept him from making any coherent noises. "Is everyone all right?" Tsunade asked the group. They, for the most part, nodded their heads, and shook the cobwebs from their minds. Tsunade picked up the scroll that Naruto had left behind. "I've been left a scroll by Naruto. He wants me to read this aloud to everyone who came on this mission." Tsunade broke the seal on the scroll, and unwrapped the first bit of it. "First I would like to thank Tazuna and his family for being good hosts, however short mine and Hinata's stay here was." Neji's eyes went wide at that. Hinata was here? Well, with Naruto? Tsunade looked at Tazuna, who grinned. That'd be like Naruto, thanking us for nothing special. Tsunade, however, posed a question to the older man. Was there a lavender-eyed girl who was accompanying Naruto? Tazuna nodded. Yeah, and a red-headed kid, too. Gaara had followed Naruto as well? She hoped he had spoke not too harshly of her to Naruto. Tsunade nodded and went back to reading the scroll. You've pushed the last boundary I think I can stand for a while. I'm disappearing into the mists of the world for a while. I think that the Tsuchikage title sounds pretty good, nay? I will probably never see any of you again unless you come looking for me. I'll try and avoid you as best as I can for now, because I don't want to be reminded of my 12 years of hell in Konoha. Tsunade had to stop reading for a moment to compose herself before continuing. I assure you that I will never and never would have attacked Konoha. I have too much respect for Sarutobi and the Yondaime's legacies to undo what they've done. I make you this deal. I will never knowingly aid any force allied against Konoha, but I will also never ally myself with someone who is helping Konoha. I never want to be hunted by Konoha hunter nin ever again, regardless of how stupid or weak they are. I will now forever just be a bad memory to Konoha. Tsunade looked at next words and nearly choked. Count me among the dead who died in other countries and whose bodies were never recovered. Naruto. A harsh silence filled the air as the last words of Naruto's letter sank in. No one moved for a while, but they thought it was better to stay still and not try to incur the Hokage's wrath. Tsunade slumped to her knees staring at the scroll, tears blankly falling down her cheeks unnoticed. Naruto was gone, and it was going to be hell to find him. That may have been the moment she steeled herself to find her little brother again. No matter the cost. Naruto fiddled with the Hokage's necklace for a few minutes, looking at the various angles that the odd stone had. He felt connected to Tsunade through the necklace, and it was one of his fonder memories. He decided to keep it, but well hidden from view. He put the necklace back around his neck, and picked up the scroll he'd been browsing through. There would be no way to test most of these more advanced skills until they made landfall. They'd all attract too much attention or simply wouldn't work on a boat. Still didn't mean he couldn't memorize how to do the skills. They were all seal-less skills like water walking or the body swap skill, so they almost certainly be useful in a tight spot, even when his hands might be occupied with something. Hinata had gone off to get herself something to eat before bed. They'd made several agreements as to how they'd live on this boat for 3 days. One rule was that one person always had to stay with the stuff. That way, unscrupulous thieves would get lost the moment they stepped foot in the door, and repeat offenders could be chastised. Hinata came back into the room carrying 2 cups of a steaming liquid. Even on the inside of the cabins it was quite cold. Naruto had learned that Kyuubi's chakra kept him naturally insulated against the cold, but Hinata didn't have that luxury, so he gave her one of the blankets from his cot. He smiled when she handed him a cup of cocoa. She blushed when his fingers came into contact with hers, but instead of her normal shocked or scared look, there was one of. Naruto went with content. They sat for a few minutes in amicable silence as Naruto finished memorizing what was written on the scroll. When he finished, he pretended to continue reading it while staring over the edge of the page to scrutinize his companion. Hinata was a girl. This much, to Naruto, revealed that she was enigmatic and he would probably never fully understand why she did certain things. However, this was a girl that, unlike almost everyone else in Konoha, treated him kindly in the face of all else. He appreciated this about her. Hinata was in an unappreciative family. Neji's nearly killing her during the Chunin exams, and her father's disdainful treatment of her were proof enough of that. Hinata was treated poorly, if only on the inside of her family. Perhaps she became a ninja to get away from them, or to make them not able to harm her. Naruto respected that about her, her desire to become stronger. He wondered where it came from sometimes. Hinata blushed every time he complimented her or touched her, intentionally or not. He found this validating of her claim of loving him. Naruto wanted desperately to reach out and grab onto that, what she claimed as love, but first he wanted to make sure that this love was as real as it came and would support him once he did accept it and return it. He began devising a plan to find out all he needed to know about Hinata's love. Hinata was very shy. She was naturally quiet and hard to get angry or anything besides startled and fearful. When he saw her happy, she seemed to restrain it, almost as if her happiness scared her too. She needed more self-confidence in herself. That would solve most of her problems, he was sure. Naruto ran his hand over his forehead, and stopped when he felt the forehead protector on his forehead. He put the scroll down, and untied his headband. He ran his fingers over the scratched surface. It had never been perfect, but as it was a hand-me-down from Iruka, it had sentimental value to him. He would keep it, hidden away from all view, and claim it was a trophy from a fight if anyone did find it. He carefully folded up the old headband and put it in his backpack. He looked directly at Hinata, who wilted in his harsh gaze. He sighed. "Hinata?" he intoned, getting her attention. She nodded slightly. "I am not going to hurt you. I would never try nor let other hurt you. It bothers me that you shy away from me when I simply look at you." Hinata looked down at the ground. Hinata spoke up. "You're different than when you were in Konoha. You've changed, and I'm afraid that this new person won't want me around for much longer." She moved to put her back against the wall, almost like she was trying to get away from him. Naruto sighed, and looked at her. "Hinata, I had a bit of a sobering experience. You've no doubt heard of the argument I had with Sakura before I left, right?" Hinata nodded, and Naruto continued. "I lost something that day that I so desperately want back, the innocence that someone I trust won't break that trust. I failed to bring back Sasuke, and Sakura gave me hell for one mistake, though I'd forgiven her several dozen mistakes, some bigger, some smaller. Iruka and Tsunade were important to me, but I'd put my trust in Sakura. She broke it." Naruto smiled one of his big smiles. "My only regret is that I didn't get to bring the old hag and Iruka with me on this trip. I don't have to worry about Ero-sensei. He'll find me if he wants to." Naruto got up and sat down on Hinata's cot. She didn't look fearful of him. More like a child who thought they were dreaming and didn't want to wake up. He tentatively put a hand on Hinata's shoulder. He was glad to see she didn't flinch when he touched her. "I want to take what you're giving me, but I want to make sure I'm not the one hallucinating this time, okay?" Hinata nodded, and Naruto drew her into an embrace. Hinata wrapped her arms around Naruto, happy to have found the one she was looking for all this time. Tsunade's group put in with Tazuna, with his good graces, for the evening to refresh themselves. All the genin were out in the revamped Wave Market, which, not quite as large as Konoha's, had some interesting little side shops and quirks that they might want to bring home. Tsunade and Kakashi had elected to remain behind, as they had no want for frivolities or comfortable items. In the quiet the nearly deserted house had left them in, Tsunade came to a decision. "I'm not going to be Hokage anymore." Kakashi looked up from Icha Paradise. He was in a way surprised that Tsunade, stubborn as she was, would be the first Hokage to step down instead of dying defending the village. But, also considering what had happened recently to her on the emotional level, he wasn't really all that surprised she would decide that. "What are you going to do after you step down?" Kakashi was pretty sure he knew the answer, but he felt that Tsunade needed to talk about it before she went off half-cocked. "I'm going to go looking for Naruto. He left me a hint, and I'm going to follow it." Kakashi looked at her. She was riled up, all right, and she wasn't thinking this through. Of course, he didn't blame her. He got the same way whenever someone even mentioned Rin or Obito. Kakashi offered up his 2 cents. "If you're going to go to Hidden Rock, you'll be wasting your time." Tsunade blanched, and looked at him. "What do you mean, wasting my time?" "He's Tsuchikage," Kakashi cut her off. "I'm going to remind you he doesn't want to be found." Tsunade's eyes widened at that. Tsuchikage was meant to throw her off the trail. Tsunade forced herself to calm down. Kakashi was Naruto's teacher, and he wasn't losing his cool. She could at least do that. Especially if she wanted to achieve her goal. "Alright, Hitaki, since you thought this through, you tell me where you think he's going." Kakashi looked at her. She'd calmed down, if only enough to hear him out without ripping him to bits for telling her she was flying off the handle. He thought it best to tread lightly here. "If he were alone, I'd say he'd go to Cloud. They'd take any ex-Konoha ninja, especially those who claim to be homeless, but still have out jutsu. But since Hinata's with him, and he's probably not going to Cloud. It's not Rock, his message makes that clear enough. So, the only major villages left are Sand and Mist," Kakashi said. Tsunade picked up and finished his thought. He wouldn't go back with Gaara. Sand doesn't treat him well, and whatever the fox has done to him, it wouldn't take long for Sand to find out about his tenant. So, he's going to Mist. Kakashi looked at her, and nodded. The place that birthed Zabuza, probably the only non-Konoha ninja that Naruto gave respect to. Kakashi smiled at the irony. Tsunade frowned, however. "But I thought that Mist were just as dangerous for Hinata as Cloud. Don't the Mist hate people with blue lines?" Kakashi shifted uncomfortably. "He's probably forgotten about that, but I've heard some interesting rumors about Mist lately." Tsunade perked her eyebrows. "Like what?" "Like that the Godem Mizuki has been assassinated, and been replaced by a giant strongman." He's been trying to make dramatic social changes in Mist, and to some extent, he's succeeded, whoever he is. Hinata's presence will probably be tolerated for long enough for Naruto to refuel, rest, and plan where to go next. If Hinata doesn't use her bloodline and keeps from using too many jutsu at all, she'll be able to hide longer. Tsunade nodded. She envied Jiraiya and Kakashi sometimes for their information-gathering skills. She couldn't keep a good spy network together because they all knew of her horrible luck in gambling, and exploited it to get out from under her thumb. She sighed. I can't immediately follow him. As a Sannin, I'm too well known, and as Hokage, I wouldn't be able to get in without massive amounts of paperwork. I'll have to lie low for a few months until it's widely known I'm no longer Hokage. Kakashi nodded. Tsunade was taking this seriously, and he knew he wouldn't get in the way of that. The genin started to slowly return, bellies filled and wallets emptied. Tsunade smiled and hoped that they would be like this for a very long time. Naruto fiddled with the headband she'd been wearing until he'd asked her to take it off. After a little explaining, Mist might not take kindly to two Konoha ninja randomly showing up on their shores. She'd quickly taken off the headband and let him hold onto it. Hers was considerably less scratched than his, and it also had a different weight to it, like a different metal had been used. Hers also only had 2 screws in the corner, where his had 3. Naruto had risen a bit earlier than usual and for good reason, too. Someone, dressed up as service personnel, was rummaging through his stuff. All of his ninja scrolls were currently around the man's belt. What are you doing? Naruto had sat up and asked. The stranger blew him off. Looking through this bag to find good stuff to sell. I've already got a shitload of money around the belt. Now, shut up and stay out of my way. With a practiced motion, he flipped open a butterfly knife. Naruto decided to play innocent victim here. Hey, I've got something under my bed. I'll even get it out for you. Just don't hurt me, he pleaded quietly. He'd gotten the thug's attention. Alright, kid, but any funny business and this knife is going in your throat. Like that would do anything to me. Naruto moved around to the foot of the cot, and picked it up. Hey, now, don't think about throwing that cot at me, he said, moving a little closer. Naruto acted startled. No, it's just bigger than the bed, he said. He slid a hand around Second Dawn's haft, and quickly switched his demeanor. Mine's bigger than yours. With a quick motion he drew the large blade out from under the bed. Giving the thief enough time to register his attack, he flipped Natsuki, thank you Vn Banman, to the flat of the blade and with a mighty swing slammed him into the wall, knocking the wind out of him, and knocking him clean unconscious. Naruto looked over at Hinata, who rolled over in her sleep, and looked like he'd disturbed it slightly, but she hadn't woken up. He guessed Kakashi's assertion of a ninja only waking up after 8 hours or in extreme personal danger held true. Naruto went about recollecting everything that the thief had stolen. He'd given him a good groin kick when he'd found the Hokage's necklace, which he'd put in the bag for safekeeping, in one of his pockets. All 9 of the scrolls he'd brought with him, 3 personal, and 6 he'd liberated from the poorly defended Hokage's library, were safely back in his pack, and the bolt of silk was safely strapped to the bag. It took a good amount of bargaining and his money, but he'd managed to obtain the entire bolt of undisturbed silk. This was a special iron-wired silk that was supposed to be arrow impervious. He just hoped the iron wire would protect the black silk and not get cut. He went about cutting off a good section to rewrap all of Natsuki, including the handle, so he could carry it around in public without causing panic. Now, he was just sitting on his cot, waiting for Hinata to wake up, and fiddling with her old forehead protector. A voice came over the intercom that was in all rooms on board this dingy. Landfall in 10 minutes. Crew to stations for landfall. 10 minutes to arrival in Mist. Naruto moved over to Hinata, and sat down on her cot. He took a moment to brush the hair out of her eyes. She's a pretty little thing, isn't she? Naruto smiled. At least for right now, your tastes and mine agree on something. Naruto felt his pace quicken, and knew that this little ray of sunshine might just get what she wants after all. Hinata, we're almost there. Time to wake up, he said, gently nudging her shoulder, trying to rouse the girl from her slumber. Hinata sleepily opened her lavender eyes and smiled at Naruto. He smiled back. Good morning, Naruto-kun. Naruto liked this little ritual. Good morning, Haim-chan. Pleasant dreams? She nodded, and sat up. She swung her legs off the edge of the bed and began putting socks on her feet. Naruto stepped outside. The thief from before was suspended from the ceiling, with the words, "I'm a thief and a liar," torn in his shirt. Naruto nodded and prodded him. His body limply moved out of the way, but he was still unconscious. He searched for a pulse and found one. "Good, I haven't killed him, you should have. I swear, one day I'm going to get you to like killing humans." Naruto gave Kyuubi a mentally indignant glare. "I'm only going to kill when it's necessary. Like the cage I decide to work under ordering me to do an assassination. Maybe I'll get involved in a war every now and again to sat you." Naruto felt Kyuubi get giddy at the thought. Naruto had found that the imagery of violence soothed the rather savage heart of Kyuubi. It was weird, but it made the fox not bother him for a while. Kyuubi would make a rather bad human being. When Hinata stepped out of their cabin, she looked at what Naruto was looking at. "He's alive," Naruto said, which seemed to relieve Hinata a little. She hadn't read the words on his shirt when she asked, "Why is he there?" Naruto glared at him, and poked him in the stomach rather forcefully. "This nutcase decided to try and steal from us. I guess we don't look like ninja with our headbands off." Hinata smiled at Naruto's comment, but it quickly turned into a glare at the man who'd tried to take all of their precious things. In her current state of dress though, the glare came off as being cute, and not really menacing. Hinata turned to Naruto. "I'll change so we can get going." Naruto nodded, and watched Hinata close the door behind her. Naruto stood sentinel in front of the door, making sure no one got in until Hinata came back out, wearing her pack and some of the clothes she'd bought while in Wave. Naruto stared for a moment. Kyuubi must have messed with him more than he thought. He'd never stared at a girl before, unless they were showing him how to do something. Even then, he didn't stare where he was staring. He quickly reined himself in and slowly turned away, back into the cabin to get his pack and sword. "And to think, I didn't even have to say anything. This had better not be part of your little ritual. It is only because my chakra is getting out of your way, you pubescent thing you." Naruto flinched at that. These new reactions were because of puberty? He accepted that for now, you only went through puberty once, so you never knew what to expect. The harbor of hidden mist was incredibly packed. Naruto had to grab a hold of Hinata's hand to not lose track of her altogether. They spent a good 15 or 20 minutes trying to get from the main harbor through to the city gates, all the while getting shunted towards another boat that was going somewhere else. When the two finally made it to a thinner part of the crowd, 7 people moved directly towards him. He was amazed that one was even dressed like Haku, but he'd since learned to tell the difference between the way a man and a woman walked. He also saw no Adam's apple on the throat of the girl. Uzumaki Naruto. "Oh shit, we're so screwed." The man saw the expression on his face, and grinned. He turned to the girl, and she nodded back. She spoke up, "We're not here to hurt you." Naruto nearly snapped his own neck, whipping his head up to look directly at the masked woman. Hell, she even sounds like Haku. What are they trying to pull here? The man who had originally spoken to him started again. "The Mizuki wants to have a word with you." The group instantly was around him, and began walking in the direction of the Mizuki fortress. Naruto pulled Natsuki off his back, and shoved his way through back to Hinata. "Whatever your boss has to say to me, he can say it to Hinata as well." Hinata turned a light pink, but stood firmly next to Naruto. The man shrugged. "So be it." This time, the cloaked figures moved into formation around both of them and they all began walking to the fortress. Naruto was amazed at the pearlescent sheen of the interior of the building. One of the Mizuki had known how to live in style, and the others hadn't thought to change that one bit. They ascended 3 flights of stairs, and came to a familiar-looking set of doors. He knew he'd never actually been here before, but they looked fleetingly familiar. "There were doors like this in the dream you asked me about." Kyuubi was being helpful instead of mischievous for once. Naruto also remembered that they looked similar to the doors to Tsunade's office, only with a large kanji for water instead of fire engraved into the door. The man who had talked to him and the Haku girl were the only ones who were still with them. The others, it seems, had other posts to attend to. The Mizuki was standing in front of the windows in the office. Naruto took a sweeping look of the room. It was just as lavish as the lobby, but unlike the cold pearl of the lobby, this room was decorated with coral that occasionally seemed to move. The man spoke up, answering his unspoken question. "It is alive, and it does move on occasion. The Nidame Mizuki could create wonderful and deadly things from a pendant of living coral. He made this office what it was today. He then turned and put his right fist on his left pectoral, a salute. I have brought Naruto, as you requested, Mizuki-sama. The man addressed gave a nod, and made a waving motion. Then man stepped outside the room. What do you want? Naruto asked, not liking being in this room almost alone. The Mizuki laughed, and turned around. Naruto was shocked when he saw the face of the Mizuki. Standing there, dressed in the robes of the Mizuki, was a person he'd never thought he'd see again, and he subsequently only had one word to whisper. Zabuza? The man nodded, and then nodded at the girl. She had taken her mask off, and Naruto was again stunned. Who else would send you a telepathic message to come to Hidden Mist? Haku, at least that was what Naruto was going to call her to avoid confusing himself, smiled kindly at him. Naruto was dumbfounded, and he turned back to face Zabuza. It's been a long time, hasn't Naruto? Needless to say, Hinata was confused as hell. Haku watched as the immense weight of the large object on Naruto's body pulled his slack body backwards onto the floor. His fall was padded by the relatively thick rug behind him, also helping to muffle the accompanying thud. Haku put a hand to her mouth and giggled lightly. Naruto stared at the ceiling for a moment, and began wondering how these two were even alive. He started wiggling his arms and legs furiously, like a very fast, overturned turtle. He just didn't get it, and Kyuubi was just as uncomfortable with the idea, though he was rejoicing where Naruto couldn't hear him. Humans have finally figured out how to cross the death barrier. That means I can kill as many as I like, so long as I leave a few behind who know how to draw them back. Oh happy day. Kyuubi took a form more appropriate to his next action. Kyuubi, in all his nine-tailed glory, began to Snoopy dance. Well, it was an adorable chibi Kyuubi, could you blame him? Naruto chose now to speak up. How the hell? Haku's giggles intensified, but were still within the realm of polite. Zabuza spoke up. Some of my followers here in Mist resurrected me using a skill that takes one live human and sacrifices him or her to retrieve a spirit from the beyond. Naruto peeked an eyebrow at Zabuza. What? The Mizuki looked back at Naruto, who furrowed his brow in concentration. This sounds familiar. I think something like this happened during the Sand Sound War. Naruto tried to think of what it was, but Hinata piped up and answered. Orochimaru revived the first and second Hokage in a battle against Sarutobi. Naruto nodded his head in agreement, and then frowned. Why's he know mist techniques? Zabuza sighed. Orochimaru is a technique thief. Who do you think Orochimaru stole that jutsu from? Sand pyromaniacs? Naruto accepted this, and moved to ask a burning question. How do you become Mizuki? Zabuza smiled, widely. I killed the Godem Mizuki. The old bastard that he was wanted the atmosphere of fear that pervaded Mist to continue, so he could manipulate it better. The leader being in control is a good thing, but people are people, not drones. Besides, Zabuza grinned maniacally. It's better when they squirm. Hinata moved to get Naruto between herself and the bloodthirsty man who was the Rokudame Hokage. Naruto saw this and glared at him. He put up his hands placatingly. You don't grow up like me and not take a sadistic joy in hurting other people. But I don't do that to people who have my respect, Zabuza said, looking straight at Naruto. The boy nodded slowly, and smiled his signature smile. So, Zabuza respected him, He and Hinata both stood up. Alright, but what's with the people at the dock? And how did you even know I was here? Haku took over. My blood limit is the powerful manipulation of ice. But I've learned other jutsu to compensate for where ice alone is not enough. Haku sighed and turned away slightly. I lured you here. I knew that given enough time, you would come, and you would know we were alive and well. Haku looked at him, and Hinata felt a pang in her chest. That was almost the same way she was sure that she looked at Naruto. But there was something different about it. Something old. Haku smiled. But here you are, sooner than expected and still almost as we left you. I'm glad for that. Haku made no motion, but the glowing look that she sent, actually, both of their ways. It unnerved Hinata, but Naruto was focused on other things. He decided to ask Zabuza what he needed to know. Would it be safe for myself and Hinata here in Hidden Mist? Zabuza looked indignant. That's a stupid question. Of course you would be. Naruto motioned to Hinata, and Zabuza looked at her. He had a sudden realization. She's a Hyuga, isn't she? Naruto nodded, and what he'd asked earlier now made more sense. Zabuza thought a moment, wording his next response with care. She will be safe so long as her identity is contained. Most people in Mist don't know about the Hyuga clan, and those that do aren't in the fearing majority. However, Zabuza was cut off as a small bird, no bigger than Naruto's hand, swooped in, dropped a scroll, and flew back out the window without a word. Zabuza picked up the scroll and broke the seal on it. His face grew a look of constrained rage on it. He threw the scroll across the room, and Haku moved to put a hand on his shoulder. What is it? It's Icicle again. Another patrol sent to explore the interior region has just disappeared. No sign of a struggle or anything. The people there are beginning to panic again. Zabuza leaned back in the chair he'd taken to read the scroll. He sighed. It's days like this I wish I could just reach out and pop the head off of the idiot commanders over there. They have no idea how to run a good ninja team. I hate it sometimes when I have to stay here in this fortress. I can't get out on the field and cut heads off. Haku moved and pulled him into a comforting embrace. Zabuza hadn't moved except slacking a bit, relaxing in Haku's new arms. He then smiled. I noticed that you're not wearing your Konoha headband anymore. Naruto grimaced. I left Konoha. I couldn't stay in a country that despised me so. Naruto looked down at the ground. I thought you wanted to become Hokage? Haku asked, standing up again. Naruto looked her in the eye, and the intensity of the emptiness of the stare startled the Neo girl. What is a country without its citizens? Zabuza nodded his head and got an idea. Why did you come here? Naruto grinned. To escape. I wanted to get away, and I needed a place to get away from it all. Hinata followed me, and I want to protect what she's given to me. Hinata went flush, and Haku smiled, putting a hand to her face. Naruto shifted the package on his back. Along with other circumstances I'm not willing to talk about with so many ears around, we'll call it growth spurts. I want to find a place where I can grow strong. When I get there, I'll do what I've always done. Naruto looked about the room, and liked what he saw. Survive and strive to be the best. He then got rigid and formal. I would like to become a mist nin, Mizuki-sama. Zabuza nodded for a moment, and then shook his head. He smiled at Naruto's confused look. I don't need you here in Mist. I need you in Icicle. No one there is even near where we are, and I need to know what's going on to make good tactical choices. We don't even know if Icicle's on an island or another landmass entirely. I will make you both Icicle ninja. Naruto nodded, and smiled. Haku moved away from Zabuza and slowly floated towards Naruto. She smiled in a demure way, but all that could see it knew she was hiding something. She stopped for a moment to listen to Naruto speak. I request that Hinata and I get to stay here for a month and get all of our affairs in order. He didn't know exactly what he just said meant, but he'd seen that phraseology used to basically get free rein for the amount of time requested. Zabuza nodded. Haku spoke up for him. We'll fill out the paperwork to make sure we'll keep our word. Haku resumed her path towards Naruto, and stopped about an arm's length away from him. You two should find a hotel for the evening while we work out a place for you to live. Haku smiled impishly and kissed Naruto on the cheek. Naruto froze in place. He'd only ever been kissed by a slightly drunk Tsunade, and even then it was more like being kissed by a mother than whatever it was Haku was doing. Hinata wanted to get angry. She really did. The only emotion that would come to her was depression. She knew that this girl knew Naruto very well, it seemed, and if she wanted to, she could whisk him away from her feeble reach and not give him back. Hinata slumped, and Haku noticed. She moved away from Naruto and went straight to Hinata, planting a kiss on her cheek. I'm not trying to steal him away from you. I already have someone. I'm just. Haku paused for a moment, both looking for the right word and letting Hinata blush furiously under her attentions. Affectionate, she said, and then proceeded to freak the younger girl out by dragging her tongue past Hinata's ear. Naruto and Hinata were in shock at the girl's actions. Zabuza restrained himself to keep from laughing too loudly. Haku moved away from the stunned pair, and consequently gave them a smoldering look, not one of anger but of warm attraction. Haku then got annoyed at their near-mindless staring. Don't you two need to get to A? Haku smiled when Naruto and Hinata turned tail and fled. Zabuza looked up at her. I think you frightened them. That's my job. Haku shrugged. Zabuza sighed. Someone's gotten more flirtatious since we've been revived. She looked at him coyly. Someone's been doing a fantastic job of restraining themselves around other people. She draped herself on his shoulders. He reached up and cupped her face. Someone's needy, he said, and she smiled. I've got brownie points to collect, don't I? They both would be busy that night. Very busy. Tsunade hadn't gotten restful sleep that night. She had awoken in fits, watching Naruto leave her behind again and again. In a way, it was worse than when they died. Naruto was alive, but he was actively avoiding her. She couldn't just go up to him and make it all better. She got out of the futon she was in when she saw that it was nearing daybreak. She walked downstairs, and heard noises in the kitchen. Shino was already up, as was Tazuna's daughter. She smiled, and hoped one day, she'd be able to watch her daughter grow up, if she ever had one. She sat down at the generous island surrounding the cooktop that Tsunami was using. The dark-haired lady smiled at her. You miss him. It wasn't a question, but Tsunade nodded anyways. He can be found again. Just go by yourself and follow him everywhere if you really want to be near him. Tsunade smiled. Just how much do you know? Tsunami returned the Hokage's smile. I know that you'd probably be better off calling him Imouto. Tsunade laughed and nodded. Probably. Tsunade could get to like this woman. But she had plans to make. Where would she go to lie low between her time as Hokage and when she could go and find Naruto? How long to stay there, and who could she trust to follow her? Who else would follow her example and leave Konoha when this was all said and done? By the time she'd realized that her food and plate were long gone, the genin and Kakashi had all shuffled down. Kakashi leaned over to her and said, tiredly, I send Hunter Nin after you if you nominate me. Tsunade laughed. She wouldn't have nominated him unless she was under a death threat from point blank. Don't worry, Konoha will have to find their own Hokage after this. If they nominate you, then you're just unlucky. Kakashi nodded. By mid-morning everyone was packed up, and somberly said their goodbyes to their good hosts. They had walked for most of the day when anyone decided to say anything. Surprisingly, it was Shino that spoke up. He's gone, and not coming back. Tsunade looked at the bug boy, and wondered what he was getting at. I do not know him all that well, and my parent hold no grudges against anyone. Why would he leave Konoha? Tsunade looked at the boy. Naruto would have done well to seek Shino out in his earlier years. Tsunade responded. For unfair reasons he cannot control. Why would anyone blame him for something he couldn't control? Tsunade found his innocent questions, however insect-like, refreshing. Because, they can't blame the one they want to. Naruto is just the next best thing. Shino tried to digest this. I think I understand. Who is the other person? I'll repeal that law when we get back. Shino again nodded, and left the conversation at that. The rest of the day was spent walking back to Konoha. Tsunade was the only person not looking forward to returning to the comforts of Konoha. It wasn't her home anymore. Machiko Hyuga was not a happy camper. Her daughter was missing and she had no idea even who to ask to find out where she'd gotten to. Machiko sighed, and glided from room to room looking for someone who might know where she'd gotten off to. While she walked, she contemplated her current state of affairs. She loved her children, that much she knew, but as for her husband, marrying him was a necessary evil for the Hyuga clan. Had Hiashi not married her, the branch clan would have become so enraged at the haughtiness of the main clan that they would have departed from Konoha altogether. Machiko's divorce of Hiashi could still cause that to happen, and it was her only leverage in most of their arguments. Arguments, she wished, would never happen. She desperately wanted someone to love, not like the love she gave her children, but like she was supposed to give to her husband, her confidant. But all she had was a life of politics, keeping this old clan from falling apart at the seams. And the one thing, her daughter Hinata, that kept her going most of the time, was gone. The Hokage was out on a mission retrieving the Uzumaki boy. She wasn't blind to her daughter's attraction to the boy, but she feared for Hinata's safety. Not from Naruto himself, but from her father's reaction. He'd likely banish her from the clan altogether if the two managed to get together. She came to Hiashi's door, something she found ridiculous about the main branch, and knocked. Enter, came the cold response. Machiko shivered. He didn't sound happy. I've come to ask you if you know where our daughter is. She isn't in her room, or on the Hyuga grounds. Hiashi looked puzzled for a moment. Perhaps she is training with her team? She did say something about brushing up her technique. Machiko knew a lie when she heard it. She'd wished that Hiashi wouldn't lie to her face, but that was wishing a bit much from the man who put his clan ahead of his family. She hated to think how he'd corrupted Hanabi or infuriated Neji just to keep his little illusion world. She sighed. What do you really know, Hiashi? Don't lie to me, you were never very good at it. Hiashi glared at her, fuming at how his perfectly believable lie had been shot down unmercifully by this ungrateful snob of a wife. The things he did for his clan. The Hokage said something ridiculous about our daughter being in love with Naruto Uzumaki. I don't see what bearing that had on anything, but the strangest thing was that she'd stopped crying by the time I'd gotten back. Machiko's breath hitched in her throat. She'd known that Hinata had loved the Uzumaki boy for a long time, but she did nothing to encourage it. She tried to give Hinata a calm household to return to. All that aside, an idea was forming in the back of her head. One she severely didn't like. Hiashi, I don't know what you think about what our daughter feels about the Uzumaki child, but Hinata looks up to him as a source of inspiration. Hiashi got a dangerous look in his eyes. Do not speak any further on this matter, Machiko. The walls always have ears, and anything you say could ruin this family's reputation. Machiko could no longer keep the bitterness from her voice. Reputation of what? Aloofness? Cruelty? I don't think anything I say will change that. Machiko composed herself and moved to leave. I will find out what happened to my daughter. And if what I think is going is, the Hyuga clan will be torn asunder by the consequences. Hiashi never did like it when she made that threat, but there was rarely anything he could do about it. What really bothered him was how she claimed Hinata. He hoped beyond a doubt that Hinata hadn't done something he couldn't fix. The clan would be devastated if she did something he couldn't cover up or spin. Two Hyuga with separate missions in life began formulating plans on what to do about this new crisis. Neither would have liked the other's plan. Hinata and Naruto had had a hard time in hotel hunting. It wasn't that there wasn't a number of hotels they could have stayed at, but the number of catcalls they both got from most of the motel and hotel surroundings discouraged them from even entering the lobbies of most of the motels. They'd finally found a place at around midnight and fallen asleep almost the instant they'd felt safe in the new surroundings. A polite knock at the door at around 10 the next morning roused them from their slumber. Naruto got up and opened the door. Haku stepped in, and looked them both over. I see that you're still in the exploration stage. She grinned ferally, though only Hinata really understood what the other girl had just said. Haku sighed at Naruto's attitude, but then grinned. We've found you a place to live. I've already checked you out, so you can simply follow me directly. The two ninja followed the hunter nin closely and the three made inane conversation on the way to the two young ninjas' new abode. The walk took nearly an hour. The house was on the outskirts of the far end of town, near all the ports and markets. The surrounding landscape was workable, but someone would have to want the land fairly badly. It was formed into several step-like cliffs, each cliff about 15 or 20 feet tall and varying from 20 to 50 feet wide. The house that Haku led them to was the last house in the district, which was fairly upscale. It was also on the last step, the next being a beach about 5 feet wide at low tide. This is it. Haku pulled out a key ring that only had 2 keys on it. One for each of them, then. She opened the door and led them inside. Both Naruto and Hinata were amazed at the home. Hinata was amazed for the space. She'd lived almost all her life at home in her cell-like room for fear of running into her father and earning a tongue lashing. She'd never been able to wander freely, even in her own home. Naruto was amazed at the cleanliness and sturdiness of the place. It needed no fixing up, and it had just recently been cleaned up. There was little furniture to speak of, a simple love seat in front of the fireplace and a small table in the dining room. Haku simply left the key on the little hook on the code rack. I hope you two like it. Haku quickly stepped outside and took to the rooftops, giggling all the way back to the Mizuki fortress. Naruto knew something was immediately wrong when someone ran off like that. Haku wasn't trying to hurt them, so there had to be something wrong with the house. He looked about the room again. The loft style of the main part of the house was appealing. When you came in the front door of the house, the formal dining room, which was currently empty, was directly to the left, and only partially closed off from the rest of the house. To the right was a powder room and a coat rack mounted on the wall. Stepping past these 2 rooms leads you to see the sunken living room on the right, complete with functional log fireplace. To the left was a full kitchen with an island. The island had an electric cooktop on it, and had a raised counter on the opposing side, probably for direct stove-to-plate eating. Between the kitchen and the dining room wall was a sliding wooden door that opened up onto a porch. A wooden walkway continued on from the foyer, on between the carpet living and tiled kitchen to the archway that lead to an archway that lead to the rest of the house. Up the stairs to your left lead to an upstairs library with built-in wall units, but the rest of the room was rather skinny and unsuitable for anything else. Going back down the stairs and going straight on ahead was the bedroom, complete with king-sized bed and adjoining bath. Naruto looked at Hinata. Hinata looked at Naruto. They both had the same thought. That devious. Haku sneezed violently, twice in a row, and knew that the two had figured out why she'd left in a hurry. The house only had one bedroom. They instantly began debating who should get it. You take it, Hinata, you'll get more privacy that way. No, Naruto, I insist that you take the bedroom. I just want to be here. Hinata, take the bedroom. Hinata managed to gather what remained of her courage. No, Naruto was getting tired of this game fast. Yes, Hinata really wanted to share, but if only one of them was going to have it, it would be her Naruto-kun. She blushed at the thought, derailing Naruto's train of thought. What is it, Haim-chan? Hinata blushed deeper at her new nickname. She responded, we could share, couldn't we? Naruto didn't want to think about that possibility until now. Since she had suggested it, she might just be comfortable with it. I guess so. Why don't we unpack everything else, and then worry about it later? Hinata quickly nodded, and began unpacking her clothes. Naruto went upstairs to the library, and began unpacking his scrolls. He quickly put the 3 he'd had for a while on the shelves, but then took a serious look at the 6 he'd swiped. The first one was one labeled, Wood Jutsu, Basics and Intermediate Levels. He clicked his tongue. Great in Konoha, hard to use anywhere else. The next one was labeled, Poison Jutsu, the Chilling Poisons. That one sounded interesting, possibly useful in most situations. He put the other 4 on the shelf. He'd look at them after mastering what was in the poison scroll. Naruto was about to leave when a scroll's title caught his eye. He could only see part of the title, but what he could see was, The Last Will. His curiosity piqued, he pulled it out and was stunned to read the title. The Last Will and Testament of Kei Sarutobi, the 3rd Hokage. Naruto descended the stairs, holding the scroll in his hand. Naruto looked at Hinata, who paused in her hurried motions to get her unmentionables into the closet on the far side of the room. It was like a wardrobe built directly into the wall with shelves built into it. She blushed as he caught her with the piece of underwear Tamari had bought for her birthday the previous year. She had only kept it because she didn't want to offend Tamari, but she was absolutely resolved never to wear something that skimpy underneath her clothes. It just seemed wrong. Naruto wasn't looking at what she was holding. Haim-chan, I found something we both need to see. Hinata quickly stopped what she was doing and followed Naruto back out into the living room. She took up a seat in the love seat while Naruto stayed on the floor. It seems when I liberated scrolls from the Hokage's library, I also got this. He said, wiggling the scroll back and forth. Hinata asked, what is it? It's the old geezer's will. Hinata looked at him for a moment. I don't follow. Who's the old geezer? Naruto flushed for a moment. He remembered that only a few people knew that's what he called the 3rd Hokage. I meant the 3rd Hokage. Hinata's eyes went wide. Weren't you paying attention when you were grabbing scrolls of the shelves? She asked him, a little concerned. Naruto gave her a big smile. I think I may have just scooped it up with the batch of scroll I grabbed. I lost a couple of them on my way out, distracting guards with misplaced scrolls they just had to return. I wonder what this was doing in with the jutsu scrolls? Naruto pondered this while he opened the scroll. He saw many names scrawled on the scroll, but each of the names near the top had a blood splotch next to it. The blood was dry and blackened, but still identifiable as such. Naruto was amazed at the variety of people on this scroll, ranging from Tsunade and Jiraiya to the Akamichi clan to Konohamaru and slew of other names that he couldn't even pronounce. He continued scrolling through it until he came to the end of the scroll. Near the end there was a note that said, only to be read when the following person is 18 or otherwise comes into possession of this scroll. Naruto went to the end of the scroll, and there in black ink was written a name with an empty box next to it. Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto was taken aback. The old man left me something? Well, let's find out what it is. Naruto quickly bit his thumb as Hinata watched on, also curious as to what the third Hokage had left to the boy she loved. A few moments after Naruto had applied the blood, the scroll came alight and a small image began coming into focus. A very small, but accurate, representation of Sarutobi was standing on the surface of the scroll. It spoke, and Naruto was at a loss for words at the accuracy of the recording. Congratulations on reaching 18, Naruto. This scroll will only come active like this if I am no longer amongst the living. I am sorry I didn't make it to see that happy occasion. The third's face hardened a little. Or, if you've snuck back into my library, I see my successor needs to up the guards. I do hope that you had a good reason for being in there. Better than your last one, anyways. Naruto flushed. Even a recording of the third could lay down the talk on him. He never expected less from the old man. Third began speaking again. Regardless of how you got your hands on this scroll, I want to thank you Naruto for being the breath of fresh air that Konoha so desperately needed. I will now tell you a few things that you need to know. As soon as this message is complete, you may authorize anyone to break the law I've foolishly put in place to protect you. Hopefully my successor has seen fit to revoke it. Naruto wondered what that law stated, but paid more attention to Sarutobi's next words. Item 1. Several items will appear after the end of this message, including several large objects that you may want to keep outside. I suggest you move the scroll outside of any building you're currently watching this in. Naruto and Hinata moved to the backyard off the porch and Sarutobi magically seemed to know that this had happened. Item 2. Hopefully the events surrounding my death left Konoha intact. If you are still there, then I request that you tell everyone that I nominate you to be Hokage when you meet the jutsu and level requirements. If you are no longer in Konoha, then this item is moot. Item 3. Amongst the items that will appear at the end of this message will be something that will tell you about your family's past. I cannot tell you who they were and not break the promise I made to your father on his deathbed. However, the item I am leaving you should make it all too clear who both your mother and father are. Item 4. Anyone else who has seen this message is asked to keep this a secret. It was very difficult for me to get the authorization to leave many of the things to Naruto that I did. One stipulation from the Council of Elders was that no one else was to know what was being given to Naruto. If he's stolen the scroll, no one will have told him this and will likely be showing to other people. Sarutobi's image lost most of its formal posture. A familiar desk materialized, and Sarutobi sat down behind it. I am proud of most of what you've done for this village, Naruto. My only regret in this life is that I didn't get to stay retired. The woeful smirk on the old Hokage's face spoke volumes about how tired the man must have been during this recording. Now, blow everyone out of the water, Konoha's wild child. I will expect nothing less from you as I watch from on high. Naruto sighed, and watched as many things began to materialize in the lawn around him. Several more scrolls appeared, including 2 that looked like summoning contracts of some sort, were there on the lawn. Naruto picked them up before they could get too terribly damp. One of the benefits of the library was that it seemed to have some sort of anti-damp construction that kept moisture out. Naruto wasn't really paying attention to the scrolls, but as he was putting them on the shelves, some of their titles came into view, most of which didn't seem like jutsu scrolls at first glance. He'd take the time to organize them later. He came back out and surveyed the rest of what was there. Several suitcases had materialized and were lying on the ground in a neat pattern. Naruto knew that Sarutobi had probably gotten all the money out of his account the day that he tried to pull it out of the bank, but they said they didn't have it anymore. There were a few chests, though most of them were empty and open. They had intricate locking mechanisms and they had several keys in them. Naruto thought about it for a moment, and said, I never thought him one to be paranoid like that. Hinata was struggling to lift one of the smaller chests off the ground. Why can't I move it? It's like it's full. Hinata cried out, exasperated. Naruto went over and picked the small chest up. It wasn't like it was full, but more like filled 2 or 3 times. He looked at the chests very carefully, but couldn't see anything weird about them. The items that the third Hokage had been concerned about, a set of statues, were something that Naruto wasn't keen on moving without someone like Gaara's or Lee's help in doing so. However, the selection of creatures that made up the statues had him a bit fascinated. There was a tanuki and a fox, but also several other creatures as well, including a cat, a kappa, and a kirin. Naruto smirked and told Kyuubi to pay attention. "Oi, Fox. Take a look at these." Kyuubi looked through Naruto's eyes and started laughing. "Well, I'll be. Where'd you find those?" These statues had been at the meeting place of the Court of Tales several centuries ago, but when some demon hunters had found that location, a younger Kyuubi had had to flee without grabbing hold of these decorations. The thirds will had them inside them. "What are they?" Kyuubi smiled. "Trust the old monkey to figure out what they were really useful for." Lesser demons avoided the area around them. It ensured privacy from all but the most powerful intruders. He grinned. "There's some of my old toys. They keep annoying little imps in such a way. Keep him around, we might need him someday." Kyuubi paused for a moment, then added, "I wonder how he came across them. I didn't leave them in Konoha, or any of the great nations. I recall right, the place where he would have to have retrieved them is a good 20 to 30-day march from the far edge of hidden sand." Naruto's mind boggled. What the hell was the third Hokage doing all the way over there? Naruto tried to figure this out while he helped Hinata move the chests inside. Tsunade had locked herself in her office the moment she had returned to Konoha. The genin that had accompanied her on their mission left, finding that the friends who hadn't been able to go on the mission had returned. During the next few days, the other genin, and lone chunin, were brought up to speed. Lee had been the one who was the most visibly upset, but it seemed that Shuji was the one who got the most steamed at the ensuing madness that had followed Naruto's departure. They sent who after him first? Choji wasn't very happy, but it was Ino that was telling him these things, so he'd at least try to be civil. The elders sent Mizuki after him first. She said, not wanting to believe it herself. So, after the one person he really wanted to have trust him digs into him, he runs off, probably never to be seen again by Konoha, and the elders send that maniac after him. Ino nodded tiredly. Choji's rage wasn't something she liked to put up with. Sure, she directed at her enemies, but she usually had an adrenaline high during that time and could deal with it. Now it was just exhausting. "Is there anything else that happened?" he said, intoning pain to those parties responsible after he was no longer bedridden. Tsunade took 6 of us to try and bring him back, along with Kakashi-sensei. He didn't get to be there though because something was in Sakura's head and he had to track her down. Choji looked thoughtful at that. He then went back to being angry at the village elders. "I think I've lost faith in the elders of this village. They're nothing but a bunch of stupid gits lost in their own agendas. I think I remember one of them calling me fat too. I oughta." Ino tuned out the now ranting Choji in favor of watching the window. Shikamaru had had to turn in the mission report for his mission and would be showing up in a few minutes. When he did poke his head through the window, she was glad to see he was worried. "I read your mission report. You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Other than the mission memories and the compulsion to call Sakura a bitch, yeah, I'm fine," she said, moving to embrace the boy. Shikamaru was by no means the greatest boyfriend in the world, but he at least genuinely cared for her, as opposed to having her to have a girlfriend. Shikamaru quickly returned the embrace, albeit awkwardly, and continued to look concernedly at her. Choji was still going full tilt as the young couple moved to the door. Shikamaru began shouting over the big-boned boy. "Ino and I are going, Choji. We'll bring you back some chips." And with that, the chunin was gone. Choji had heard him, and nodded, but he was too involved in his rant about the poor quality of Konoha's elders to say anything. Or, at least, anything coherent. Ino and Shikamaru had walked a good distance from the hospital before either one of them spoke up. "Tsunade's quitting, and I think that Konoha's gonna go under serious political changes as she goes." Shikamaru's eyes went wide. The Godem Hokage was giving up? It was unthinkable. This is so troublesome. He spoke aloud, and Ino confirmed it. "I thought about leaving with her. If it's so bad that the head honcho is bailing ship, then should the rats leave the boat too?" Shikamaru looked at her, giving her a slight glare. He didn't like to think of his girlfriend, no matter how annoying she was being, as a rat. "But then, I thought, maybe I can help in the reconstruction? You know, help to make sure this doesn't happen again for a long time?" She stopped and turned to face the boy she'd been walking beside. "You gonna be there with me, bum?" she asked him. He smiled. "Yes, troublesome," he said, smiling the whole time. Even though she was little trouble as a girlfriend, the name just stuck with her. They both knew that their pet names had other people confused because they sometimes used them as insults too. Meanwhile, Neji and Tenten were restraining, as best they could, a Lee who wasn't quite making sense anymore. The last thing that had made sense was a very fast, "I'm going to go find him," which Tenten and Neji were still trying to put a stop to. Tenten remembered at the mission debrief that Tsunade was going to make an important announcement, her last acts as Hokage or something to that effect. She began shouting at the very top of her lungs. "Lee, we've got an announcement to attend." Lee paused to look at her. "What do you mean?" he asked, energy coursing through his system. Tenten looked him in the eyes. "I mean that Tsunade is making a very important announcement, something that all able-bodied ninjas are required to attend. I don't want to find out what the punishment is for not attending." The glint in her eyes made Lee shiver. Lee knew that that particular look promised additional pain for not cooperating. It was the only thing that Tenten could do besides asking Guy to keep him in line. The group of three began walking to the main square in front of the Hokage's tower. Several speakers lined the nearly packed square, and the only person apparently missing from this meeting was Tsunade herself. Tenten smiled when she saw Ino and Shikamaru walk into the square holding hands. Glad to know she wasn't the only girl who was running late. Tsunade stepped out onto a balcony and up to a podium with a single microphone on it. "At the end of this day, I will no longer be Godem Hokage. While this is a disheartening thought for many of you, I believe in the Leaf Nation to select a competent leader after me. I am going to be instituting several changes as I am leaving, all of which are to be carried out to the letter. Understood?" The assenting nod of the crowd below her allowed her to continue. "The first action I am going to take is to finalize the relationship between Sand and Leaf. They asked me for a candidate for Case Cage, something I'm only too willing to give them. After seeing the changes wrought in the boy during the Chunin exams, I will nominate Subaku no Gaara. Why would I nominate him, as opposed to anyone else? I will explain that further in my last action. My second action is to dissolve the current Council of Elders. I have found that—" a voice rang out from the side of the square. Apparently the Council of Elders didn't want that to happen to them. "Under what authority, sapling, do you rob us of power?" The same old lady who'd given her a hard time about defending Naruto was now going to make her life hard. "Again, as I was saying, I have found that the current Council of Elders is too wrapped up in their own agendas to see past their own noses long enough to see the good of Konoha. If they feel threatened, including their prominent positions in the village, or they feel that their own lives might be in danger, they take every radical step to prevent that from happening." Tsunade turned and looked the old hag directly in the eye. "Pushing that hard usually gives you what you don't want." Tsunade turned back to face the majority of the crowd. However, the old woman didn't feel like being ignored. "Konoha, do you really believe in the upstart who doesn't share our wisdom and knowledge? Who has not seen death and devastation? Who doesn't know to repair a country after war, only to—" This time, a random person in the crowd spoke up. "Oh, shut up. You ain't done nothing for this village since you let the fourth seal up Kyuubi." Rightly startled, Tsunade seized her chance to finish. "All major clans, all 51 registered, are now eligible to launch a campaign for membership into the Council of Elders. The number of positions in the council is also going down from 13 to 7. However, to keep variety up, there will be an election process whenever a member of the council dies or when they've been on the council for more than 5 years. Those who are not in clans, the majority of you, will be the voters on this one. Pick the clans you think can lead and lead together. I want to come back to Konoha in 10 years and know I did right by you." The third item is more really an announcement than a decree. I am not going to name a successor because the only person I think is qualified to lead you is not part of this village anymore and many of you simply wouldn't follow him. But that's another story for another day. Again, I am going to trust the general consensus of the people of Konohagakure to make that decision. The fourth action is to say that those ninja and administrative people who are helping with the rebuilding effort cannot be displaced until they are done with their jobs. That said, they have no room for dilly-dallying. I wanted this done in 2 years, and that's their time limit. Tsunade smiled as several people in the crowd ran back to their stations. They had heard the implied threat in her voice and didn't want to know if she'd carry it out. "My final action as the Godem Hokage, I am repealing the law that the Sandaime Hokage put into place. He felt that it would protect us from making stupid mistakes, coddling a person who needed to be raised like everyone else. Instead, the only thing the Third's Law created was a place where the one person we needed to keep wanted to run to someplace that wasn't here. Shizune had stepped out onto the balcony, perhaps to lend strength to her teacher, perhaps to simply hear what Tsunade had to say. The Third's Law, in its most basic form, states that no person who survived the Kyuubi attack was allowed to tell Naruto Uzumaki of the nature of what had been done to him, nor tell their own children what Naruto really was. I am going to remove all doubts, rumors and gossips from your minds on exactly what Naruto Uzumaki is and what his relationship with Kyuubi no Kitsune is. Many of you will feel very foolish when I am done. Tsunade spent the next hour of her time deeply explaining the meaning of the word jinchuriki to everyone in the square, making sure that they all understood that Kyuubi and Naruto were two separate entities and that Naruto had been driving his body all along. After 20 minutes of answering questions, and pounding one person who was stupid enough to ask about something other than Naruto's condition, Tsunade composed herself and began speaking again. An addendum to the action I've just made. Under no circumstances are Naruto Uzumaki or Hinata Hyuga to made missing nin under any circumstances. I have written proof that neither of them have hostile intentions towards Konoha. They merely wish to be left alone by their tormentors. Machiko Hyuga looked up at that. Machiko was a rarity in the Hyuga clan, a member who was fully gifted in the Byakugan, but had deep emerald eyes that sparkled like their namesake gem in the light. She had been wondering where Hinata had gone to, and now she may have an answer. She stood up from her seat in the branch family booth. Tsunade, why have you included Hinata in that statement? Hiashi sent her a glare that she read as, "Don't embarrass the clan. Sit back down." She was having none of that. Tsunade promptly replied, smiling mirthlessly. Hinata found out, probably before I did, that Naruto had left the village and pursued him to Wave Country. From the scroll Naruto left behind, she held out the scroll for a moment, before returning it to its resting place. It seems that Hinata has joined up with Naruto. Hiashi stood up at this. This is an outrage. The Hyuga clan will not stand for this propaganda, Machiko interrupted him. The Hyuga main clan won't stand for the truth. The branch clan is going to have nothing more to do with you. I see that your foolish choices Hiashi weren't in the best interest of the clan, but rather its prestige. It doesn't matter if the clan is falling apart, so long as it doesn't look like it, you don't care. Machiko pulled a fan from her waist and began to flick it open and closed. To a casual observer, this would simply look like a sign of annoyance and she was trying to calm herself down by falling back on one of her idiosyncratic motions. In actuality, this was a threat. If you keep pushing this Hiashi, I'm going to remind you why I'm the head of the branch family. Machiko, unlike most of the modern members of the branch family, had been sent back to the branch family's homeland to be trained to be a great leader, something Machiko had been a natural at. This training included harsh ninja training. Machiko was good enough to defeat Hiashi without using her Byakugan, using only taijutsu, disregarding the fact that it was one of her two specialties. Hiashi backed down, if grumpily. Seeing as how if the branch family separates from the main family, we will be dogged until we rejoin, we have packed up and are moving out. We are returning to our home country, though most are actually going for the first time. We are no longer your inferiors, partners or in any other way bound to you. Machiko pulled her hand up and pulled the ring off her finger. In any way Hiashi, my only hope is that when she grows up, Hanabi will see the arrogance and foolhardiness of the main family and seek me out. Until that day, I will see no sign of you again. Machiko then threw the ring across the square and, as Hiashi was so stunned, it bounced squarely off his head. Tsunade, I would have a word with you after this. Machiko said, but Tsunade held up a hand. I am finished here. You can have your word now. The crowd began to disperse, and the two elder women stood side by side. Machiko barely came up to Tsunade's chin and had to look up to look the elder woman in the eye. You seem to know the most about this situation. Any clue as to where they went? Tsunade leaned into the other woman's ear and said, I'm not comfortable directly telling you with so many ears around. However, I know where the branch family's homeland is, and I can say that my best guess is that it's on your way home. She smiled down at Machiko, who looked at her for a moment. Then Machiko digested the information and got a worried look on her face. I should go and get her away from there, then. They are not renowned for their kindness toward people, like us. Machiko said, trying to keep as much information secret as possible without making conversation unintelligible. Tsunade shook her head. Naruto will keep her safe. He wouldn't have gone there if he didn't believe they wouldn't be safe. But do stop by and see how they're doing. It would probably be a great boost in their minds to see you and your family. Machiko nodded, and then turned to her two aides. Tsunade put a hand on her shoulder. If you do see them, please tell them of the things that have happened in Konoha. I don't want Naruto to start running when I get to where I think he is. Machiko stopped at Tsunade's words and turned to face the woman. She bowed deeply but didn't take her eyes off of Tsunade's. I humbly thank you for the information you have given me. I will use it well and shall put in a good word for you with those I seek. Machiko then turned and began talking in her own personal code to her aides, who began jotting down notes. Be safe, Naruto. I will find you. Then you can start running like hell. About a week after they had finished moving in and mostly adjusting, Naruto and Hinata were still having one minor problem. The one bedroom was driving them both crazy. Even with the money the third had left them, Naruto said that he'd rather save it for a later use, like building another bedroom entirely, rather than spend a portion of it on a bunk bed. They had no other place in the small cabin to store the larger bed anyways. The first night they had tried sleeping in the same bed, Naruto had simply waited until Hinata was sound asleep and then proceeded to leave the bed and sleep on the love seat. Not only had the small, cushioned seat given him a painful crick in his neck, he also had to put up with a mopey Hinata the next day. Anytime he tried to apologize, she just shook her head and stopped him and smiled sadly. He promised himself to make sure he never did that again. The next few mornings they had awoken in rather compromising positions, hands in inappropriate places, arms and legs entwined to where they pinned each other down, or someone had had a naughty dream and taken the shirt off the other, which, thankfully for Naruto, seemed to happen to Hinata more than him. And they were lying in the bed topless, one of which had Haku capitalizing on the teasing potential of the situation and showing neither ninja any mercy. She had then had them promptly fill out a deluge of paperwork, citizenship, ninja employment, waivers, and other general items that had them busy for the rest of that day. They had several stacks of paper left over that they were supposed to keep, so Naruto decided to capitalize on the chests that had been given to him by the third. He went upstairs and fumbled with the far right key on the largest chest in the room. He dropped most of the papers he was holding when he saw the dozens of scrolls in the chest. On top of them was a single scrap of paper reading, "How the hell else are you gonna become Hokage? Start reading." Naruto smiled and closed the lid of the chest, then selected the far left key. He had guessed correctly. Somehow, Sarutobi had managed to enchant these chests to have multiple chests, depending on which key was turned. The spell or jutsu or whatever he'd used obviously didn't hide the weight of the other stuff, just allowed it to coexist in the same space. He shoveled the papers into the chest and walked back down the stairs. He'd managed to get them all the papers upstairs in one load, so he went back down to ask for Hinata's help unloading the scrolls onto the shelves. It appeared that they were going to be much fuller sooner than Naruto ever could have hoped. One afternoon at the end of the same week, the two had had nothing to do, so Naruto had gone up and pulled the poison jutsu scroll off the shelf to read it. He was going to master the scrolls with multiple jutsu on them first, as Sarutobi had made a one scroll one jutsu rule for himself. Naruto felt that he was going to absorb those quickly, so he was going to take those with him to Icicle, where he'd probably have less time to simply read. He had come back downstairs and plopped onto the now familiar love seat to start reading. The chakra poisons in this scroll weren't going to kill anyone immediately, but they had one thing going for them. If done from a distance, it would seem that the person was more catching a cold rather than being poisoned. They were excellent assassination techniques. Naruto had laid the scroll down and was about to practice the hand seals when he noticed a note hanging by a single senbon on the fireplace. He rolled up the scroll and pulled the note off the mantle to read it. I asked Haku to deliver this message so I could go get ready for a surprise. Naruto snorted. Haku was a bad liar. Hinata hadn't written this message, albeit it was in her handwriting. Had Hinata been writing this message, it would have been a lot more wobbly. Surprise also sounded like Haku's idea. She left a suit for you on the bed to wear. Meet me at the fountain in the square near here around 6 o'clock. Please remember to wear the suit. Haim-chan. When Naruto read the last line of the note, he instantly knew that Haku had written it. He called Hinata Haim-chan, That wasn't a nickname she'd earned or was likely to sign. But Naruto decided to humor the two girls in this endeavor. After all, what would it feel like to fall in love with someone who returned your feelings?
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.